jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey!
Jingle bells, Batman smelt, Robin laid an egg. The Batmobile lost the wheel, and the Joker got away.
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about Christmas, kind of.
Huh?
Merry
Christmas?
Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, one and all. This is coming out on December 24th, Christmas Eve here in the United States and wherever else in the world celebrates Christmas. I'm told it's a uniquely American holiday by our media.
Yes, no, it is. If you don't love Christmas, it means you're not American. And if you do love Christmas, it means you are American.
Yeah.
Is what I'm led to believe.
So all you Brits celebrating Christmas,
yes,
you're actually American.
Yes, and all you Japanese people eating Kentucky Fried Chicken, you as well have been adopted into our country. My condolences.
All right. No, but we are, this is our annual now Christmas episode, which started 2 years ago with our episode about Pokemon Christmas Bash.
Yeah, this is, I like to think of this as Jonathan's little pet Christmas project.
Yes, so we did it December 24th, Pokemon Christmas Bash. Last year, December 24th, we did our Christmas Carol, where we read a Christian carol, the Old West evangelical Christian version of a Christmas carol that is the worst thing ever written.
Yeah, there's so much packed into that premise that even having literally read through the entire thing with you, it's still hard to believe. This, like, why does it even, like... my favorite part is that it's also Old West.
Yes.
Like, I don't know why they had to also make it Old West, but they did.
Yeah, well, they had to make it American.
Yes.
None of that British crap. But this year we are doing something a little more conventional, but also very fun, which is part 3 of our Batman on Film series. Part 1 was Batman 66, part 2 was Batman 89, and we're moving into our lifetimes, sort of. This was a couple of years, months before we were born. 1992 with Batman Returns, the sequel by Tim Burton, starring again Michael Keaton. One of the weirdest movies ever made in Hollywood.
Yeah. It's a fucking movie.
It's a fucking movie. So we will be talking about that. That will be our Christmas episode this year because it just aligned perfectly. Because part of the thing that is wonderful genuinely about Batman Returns is that its Christmas stuff is not, I feel like, just like table dressing. Mm-hmm. Like, I think I've said this before. Die Hard, I know everyone makes the jokes about it being a Christmas movie, but like Die Hard could be set any time of the year. It's not that important to it. Batman Returns, it kind of matters that it is snowy and there are the trees and it is a time for supposedly celebrating because this is a mean-spirited, festive little movie.
Yeah, it is gross.
Yeah.
In all the meanings of that word.
Yes. So, we will be talking about Batman Returns today. If you have not heard our earlier episode this week where we did all our stuff and everything, we talked about the Mandalorian finale, we talked about the Cyberpunk 2077 news, all of that. This is just our fun Christmas Batman Returns episode. So, Sean, I think how we've generally been doing this is kind of our overall reactions and then a little bit of history and then getting into the movie in depth. But, I think people know that I love this movie because I have written about it before. I have tweeted about it. I head over heels love and I'm a little terrified by this movie. Mm-hmm. I know you had not seen it in a long time.
Yes, the last time I'd seen it was in high school, around the last time I saw Batman 89.
Yeah. So what did you think? Like, what was your thought of this before going into it again? And what did you think about it watching it for the first time as an adult now?
Yeah, I think I've always had a slightly conflicted relationship with this movie, and I don't think I would categorize my relationship as non-conflicted now. I definitely like it more now, and I respect the fuck out of it. I think I've always been kind of like put off by some of what the movie does.
Oh, you don't say.
Yes. And I think I still am, but in kind of different ways. But watching it now after so much time, like, away from this movie and kind of forgetting most of the details, like, there's that thing of, like, I sort of remembered there's a lot of weird penguin shit that happens at the end, and I remembered Danny DeVito, obviously, and Michelle Pfeiffer, and I remembered how fucking ridiculous Christopher Walken looks in every scene of this movie, and it's one of the best parts of the whole movie is the fucking whole weird, like, mad scientist Mozart thing he's got going on, but I'd forgotten most of like what really the movie is doing, and in watching it now, I think one, I understand why you're so head over heels for it because it is like fucking weird psychosexual Freudian bullshit, and it's like if there's one thing I know about film studies people, it's that they like their Freudian bullshit, and it's like it is top to bottom. This movie is just drenched in it.
This would be Freud's favorite superhero movie.
Yes, it is like this movie just sort of revels in it, and I think it is, and it's like a common sort of I would say, subtextual theme of Batman. It doesn't sort of pop up as like a major theme in much Batman media, but it's always an ever-present dynamic of Batman, partially because he deals with like the seedier elements and he's got like sort of darker stories generally associated with the character. Is that you have this Freudian split and you've got the mask stuff and you've got like a weird sort of like sexual quality to it. He's got like his relationship with Catwoman has always had this weird, we've like bondage-esque element to it of them wearing the costumes and all that kind of stuff. So it's always been there, but Batman media very rarely like dives into it head first. And it's like, this movie doesn't just like dive into it head first. It takes a bucket of it and dumps the bucket of it over its head, and then it dives in and then like gurgles it and just sort of just is like suffused in it. The movie just loves it. And that's like so, and there's something like really fascinating about it, and there's a like a virtuosic quality to, I think, the direction of the film, accompanied with Danny Elfman's score that I think like kind of ties everything together to make like the movie just sort of flows so naturally, particularly the first 2/3, from scene to scene and moment to moment and beat to beat, putting together this weird tableau of Batman, Catwoman, and Penguin and Max Shrek, and their sort of strange psychological issues and
it's amazing how much more cohesive a movie
Yes.
it is than Batman 89.
Oh, it is 1,000 times better than Batman 89. Like those movies are not even like in competition. Like it's like the Batman 89 is like Little League and this is like the big boys playing.
Yes.
Like this movie is operating on such a better level than that film is. I would say that I think in the third act, I think it runs into some issues where I think like some of like the Freudian stuff, I don't think carries the movie all the way through. And so I think some of that transition, particularly around the Penguin and the mayoral stuff, and that like his mayoral candidacy failing and that like his whole plan after that, I think that stuff gets very messy. And there's like some stuff where I think like the movie doesn't really drive everything all the way home. And that's a little bit disappointing because for the first 2/3, I was like, full in on this movie's bullshit. And I think, and this is like, I think something that happens a lot with stuff that gets like a little bit too deep into the weird psychological stuff, is it ends up losing some perspective on some of the other more like kind of socially minded themes that the movie is playing with in the earlier parts that kind of feel like they kind of fall away. But the overall experience is really fascinating. It is a really great movie. It is, I think, like one of the best superhero movies. And it deals with material that is part and parcel to the superhero genre that the superhero genre very rarely takes a serious like investigative look at, and this movie is like the definitive take on the psychosexual component of people running around in masks committing crimes or trying to fight those crimes.
Like honestly, Tim Burton, early 90s, was the guy who could have done Watchmen.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone else that I can think of who could have done it. When you look at this movie. And I don't know if you need Watchmen as a movie in a world where Batman Returns exists.
Yes, because you're right. Because Watchmen is one of the other few things that really does the same sort of element of taking that side of the superhero mythos like very seriously and kind of like thematizing it and exploring it artistically.
Yeah. I think this movie, to me, because it's been a couple years since I'd watched it too, and I do think one thing that is really interesting revisiting it after any period of time in the era we're living is superhero movies have just become so homogenized. There are nice things about that, and that the homogenization of Marvel actually means a much broader spectrum of kinds of heroes you'll get.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing that you get with any genre once it's like its homogenization is like the genre norms being solidified in film, in a way that here it's still kind of like a little bit the Wild West in terms of what the fuck is a superhero movie.
Right. But, like, we live in a world where when you go to see a superhero movie in a theater, you generally know what you're going to get. And Batman Returns, I think, is even more shocking in a world where you've seen every MCU movie. You know? Because this movie, I 100% believe could never get made today.
Oh, God, no.
I can't believe how it got made in 1992. But as you say, it was more of a Wild West for this kind of thing. There weren't a million examples of this. It made sense to kind of give Tim Burton the reins after that first one did so well. All of this stuff. This would never, ever, 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 ever get made today.
Yeah. I mean, this is basically the Citizen Kane of superhero movies in the sense of like, you got this like weird filmmaker to let him do whatever the fuck he wanted. And in this case, he just did weird pervert shit.
Yeah. The difference being, I'm not sure this has a huge influence on later superhero movies.
Sure. But in terms of like the production, like where it feels so like unique to its peers and a lot of other stuff around it, that's like, well, it's just because he let this dude do whatever the fuck he wanted. Yeah. Whether that was the right choice or not, it depends on the eye of the beholder. But I sure enjoyed it.
Well, I mean, this movie has a fascinating history because the basics of it is after Batman 1989. Huge hit. Obviously, Warner wants a sequel. It is a different era, though, where you don't like have the director pre-signed to do a sequel. You're not in production a month after the first movie opens. There's none of that. Like, there's actual time spent figuring this out. And Tim Burton goes off and does Edward Scissorhands with Johnny Depp, obviously, and Winona Ryder again, who he'd worked with on Beetlejuice. This makes him an even bigger, like, kind of critical darling. And that one's also a hit. So, like, he's coming off a string of Beetlejuice, Batman, Edward Scissorhands that, like, obviously Warner wants him to do this.
Yeah.
You would be crazy not to get Tim Burton in that viewpoint, right? Because, hey, he made the first one work, and he made these other ones work. So, in the meantime, while he's working on Edward Scissorhands, they have Sam Hamm, who wrote the main draft of the first movie, doing a draft here. And his version is apparently very different. It is Penguin and Catwoman, but they are, all I've read about this is they are going after hidden treasure. I don't know what that means, but it was, I think, a very different movie.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is in a Batman movie.
I have no idea. But Tim Burton is working with a guy named Daniel Waters. He's the guy who wrote Heathers. And Daniel Waters and Tim Burton are working on a sequel to Beetlejuice. This is something that Burton has revisited many times over his career. It's never happened, but he's tried to get it made. And Beetlejuice was still new. Beetlejuice is 88. So they wrote this script, which I think you can just go find the Beetlejuice 2 script at this point, because that one has been around for a while. Mm-hmm. It never got made, but he really liked Daniel Waters' work. So he was, at this point, is working with Waters on this, and then he decides to do Batman Returns, and Warner's gives him full creative control. So this is the opposite of the first movie. There's no one looking over his shoulder. There's no producer building sets without his permission. He is 100% in the driver's seat, and he brings on Daniel Waters, who is the main writer on this movie. Sam Hamm has a credit, but because of WGA stuff, but none of his movie is in this. And there was another writer who did uncredited rewrites on sets because Daniel Waters had to go do other stuff. But if you're thinking about the creatives of this movie, it is, and this tells you a lot, it is primarily Tim Burton with Daniel Waters. It is not a kind of mess of writers and producers and Tim Burton kind of in the middle of this storm. Tim Burton is, even 3 years removed, a much more established figure, and so you have this. Waters really brings in the social satire aspect of the evil mogul in Max Shrek, who is backing Penguin, who's going to run for office, combined with, obviously, you've got this kind of feminist mirror to that with Catwoman, who's also this social satire. And Daniel Waters and Tim Burton bring in a lot of their love for the Adam West series. Because I think something that is under-discussed with Batman Returns is that it is just as much as Batman and Robin, which we're going to get to, indebted to the Adam West series. Stylistically, not as much as like a Batman and Robin, which is, I would say, pretty poor imitation of that, but it is an imitation of that. This is much more thematically, and I think in terms of its wordplay and stuff, this is the Adam West. This is very meaningfully the Adam West show for adults.
Yes, no, like it is. I mean, Penguin speaks at like 1,000 puns a minute, right? Yeah. It is a bunch of like really weird gags. I mean, it is a profoundly silly movie. It is. Yes. It is like, well, like a lot. It is very like dark in that sort of like a lot of like the ideas and the imagery is very either like literally or like thematically dark. It is so goofy. It is just like so over the top and ridiculous. I mean, you have Catwoman's transformation scene ends with a shot of like looking through the window of her "Hello There" neon sign, and she's broken the O in the T, and it just says "Hell Here."
Yes,
that is so fucking dumb. That like it is making me realize like I'm really fascinated to watch Batman Forever and Batman and Robin because there's a big narrative about like, oh, it was dark and then it became like silly. But it's like, I mean, this is dark, but it's also super fucking silly.
It is super fucking silly. And like Tim Burton, when he's talked about this movie, one, he vastly prefers this to the first movie, as you can probably imagine.
As anyone would.
As anyone should. I mean, but there is a significant, we should say, well, I'll talk about the backlash in a second.
Okay, yeah.
But he very much prefers this, and he has always said, People told me this one was darker, and I don't think it's darker than the first movie. And I get what he means by that, because there is a level where obviously this is a darker movie than the first one. It is grisly, it is bloody, it has more death, it has more fucked up content.
Yeah.
But it is also goofy and silly, and it is pitched at a level where the word dark, I don't think actually kind of is helpful, because dark implies a certain level of reality that this movie is not playing with.
Yes.
This movie is because I think the thing when you're talking about like the sexual subtext of Batman, the other major Batman thing that has done that is the Adam West show. It just does it through a much more sublimated way, I would say. This movie takes all of, I think, the social satire and the psychosexual drama of the Adam West show and blows it up into the main text through the lens of German expressionism.
Yes.
And that is what Batman Returns is. You take half a shot of Caligari and half a shot of Adam West Batman, mix in some Nosferatu, and you've got Batman Returns.
Yes. And just some of like Tim Burton's whatever, whatever's going on in his head.
Yeah.
Put that in there.
Because it is a super identifiable Tim Burton movie. I said this, I was watching this with my brother last night, and from the opening frames of like the mansion and the parents, and they've got the kid in the cage, I'm like, oh my God, this is such a Tim Burton movie.
Yeah.
Because you can just feel like that first movie is identifiably Tim Burton, but it is Tim Burton sublimated to studio demands. This is much more, this is the guy who made Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands.
Yes, yeah.
Even like just the way the parents of the Penguin act and like have their makeup and costumes and the way they like, one of them is short and one of them is tall and the tall one is the woman. Like there's just a lot of like Tim Burton to this.
Yeah, I mean the moment where they like look at the cage after the baby has like grabbed the cat and like killed the cat or whatever, and they both take a fucking swig of their wine or whatever, and then the camera cuts. Like, yeah, it is goofy in this like sort of weird Tim Burton-y way.
I can imagine this movie in stop motion. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
It could be Frankenweenie or Corpse Bride. It's and this was made concurrently with Nightmare Before Christmas, which Tim Burton did not direct. People make that mistake all the time, but this was, if you see a lot of affinity between those two movies, like Danny Elfman's score sounds very, not that it's the same themes, but just the orchestration is very similar. I mean, he did them concurrently.
Yeah.
Nightmare was 93, but had a longer lead time for music, obviously. So, all of that is in there. I do think the Adam West influences are big, and one of those is they got the idea for the whole mayoral side of this from an episode of the Adam West show. It's in season 2. It's the two-parter His Honor the Penguin and Dishonor the Penguin. And if you have not seen those episodes, you should 100% stop this podcast, go watch them, because they are amazing. It is a two-parter where the Penguin decides he wants to run for mayor. He starts by staging a crime that he then stops, so he becomes a civic-minded citizen.
Classic.
He runs. The cops and the mayor, or like not the cops, but like the Gordon and the mayor convince Batman to run against him because Batman is the only person in Gotham with high enough approval ratings, because they have a whole pollster firm they make fun of. And then Batman runs against him. And it is an amazing two-parter that I watched it yesterday. Feels like someone came back from the year 2016 and did a Trump parody in the 60s, because it is so dead fucking on the nose to like our era of politics, with a couple of exceptions. That episode has too much faith in the voters because the Penguin loses. Although when the Penguin loses, he does shout, "Voter fraud!"
Yeah, well, I think part of what you're seeing there is also the like Banana Republic phenomena of the Cold War, the 60s being parodized there, which is now just what like Trump's playbook is basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I know, but it's anything that is prescient will stay prescient.
Yeah.
But it's really amazing to watch. It's very funny. It is more comedic than Batman Returns is, but a lot of the stuff they pull from for the mayoral side of it with the Penguin here is inspired by that, including Penguin like saying bad things about the voters and then it getting played back. There's a lot of this stuff. So that one is a major influence. And just overall, like you and I noted that there's some Adam West in the first movie, particularly in like some of the canted angles they do some puns, but it's all over this one.
Yeah, it is like unavoidable. Like you are getting like, it's like some of the dialogue that the Penguin has is just like, what if you took the Adam West dialogue and just turned the raunchy meter up to 11? Like, it's the same philosophy in terms of dialogue writing, just sort of for a slightly different audience.
Yes, exactly. So it's a really amazing thing. And I do think the dominant discussion that like, oh, the Tim Burton movies were this break from the Adam West. But no, they weren't.
No, they were not. Yeah.
They were not. There's Jack Nicholson is doing Cesar Romero in that first movie. You've got all the canted angles. You've got the heavy stylization. Batman Returns goes whole hog with it, just in a kind of nightmarish mode. And then you've got the Schumacher movies. So like, really, I don't think on film you got a hard break with Adam West until Chris Nolan.
Well, we'll see once we revisit those.
Maybe they'll like
be pointing out, it's like, well, no, fuck, like this is just like if you know if Christian Bale just looks slightly chubbier, it would just basically be Adam West.
But yeah, so that's kind of the history of Batman Returns. This movie did not do nearly as well at the box office. It was extremely controversial. So this movie made, let's see, 282 million worldwide. The first movie did, I want to look this up, I want to say 500 million or something, so it was a pretty big drop. That first movie made 411 million. So, you know, a fairly big drop for a sequel. Pretty good considering how fucking weird this movie is. Yeah. But, like, you know, this one had fairly mixed reception contemporaneously. It is much better beloved now. But it was like, Roger Ebert gave this 2 stars. He did not like it, for instance. And he gave the original, I think, 4. So, like, that was kind of the view at the time, was that this was the weird, weaker version of it. There was a lot of parent group outrage because this one was still marketed with all of the toys and the coloring books and all that stuff. And it is not a kid's movie.
No.
It is silly, as you say. But it's not for kids.
No, there's that part where Catwoman touches Batman's dick in this movie.
Yeah.
I can see why a parent would be upset if they brought their 8-year-old kid to watch this movie.
So if you're wondering, hey, why did they not bring Tim Burton back and do Joel Schumacher and all that for Batman Forever, and why is it all neon colored? It's not hard to draw the dots, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a reason for all of that. Although I still think it's funny, it did not break Warner's relationship with Tim Burton, because what he next went to do with them was Superman Lives, which never got made. But I do love the idea that he made Batman Returns and they said, you know who's perfect for Superman? You, Tim Burton.
Yeah, it's definitely like, well, you know, it's like, well, I mean, Tim Burton, you've done really well by us. I think maybe they did a little bit of a misfire with Batman Returns, but you still did quite well, but not as good as what we were hoping. But I think we've got it. We know exactly what we need to do, how we can transition you into really successful property. What if you took your, like, weird gothic sensibilities that you were using to direct movies about a weird gothic superhero, and took your weird gothic sensibilities to direct a movie that has absolutely nothing to do with gothicism or darkness or anything like that, but the brightest, most cheerful superhero you could possibly find, motherfucking Superman.
I mean, this is a mistake Warner Brothers still makes to this day, assuming that if you can direct Superman, you can direct Batman, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's right, because they just did this to Zack Snyder. Oh, fuck.
And really, with Chris Nolan, because Chris Nolan was the producer and writer on Man of Steel. So
yeah, it's, you know, it's, I get they're both DC superheroes, but Batman and Superman are very different characters.
Yes. So anyway, that's kind of the backstory, but this movie, as you say, I like the word tableau you used for the setup, because it is 4 main characters. I would say it's hard to say who the protagonist is. I've always thought it's Catwoman, but we can talk about it in different ways. But you have Batman, Catwoman, Penguin, and Max Shrek.
And really, Penguin, Max Shrek are kind of the same character to me. Like, they feels like Batman and Catwoman both have their, like, this is, I think, part of, like, the Freudian thing that the movie is doing, that both of those characters have their alter egos or their split personality. Penguin doesn't, but he does, because it's Max Shrek is the like Bruce Wayne to Penguin's Batman, basically.
It's a really good way to put it, and they are put into conflict like that, obviously. So you have these 4 main characters: Christopher Walken, Danny DeVito, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Michael Keaton, and that's kind of the setup for your movie. I think this movie has a reputation for, like, oh, there's no Batman in it, and that's actually really not true, but he is used very differently than in any other Batman movie I can think of.
He's used here more the way he's used in a lot of, like, kind of normal Batman comics, where he's a pre-established character. We already know who this Batman is from the first movie, and we kind of do. The first movie has its problems we talked about with how it uses Batman. But it's like, once you have your Batman established, Batman is a superhero character that can very easily be used around the edges of a story, rather than being the focus, which is a lot harder to do with, like, a Spider-Man or Superman, who tend to have to be more the central piece of their story. Batman, since he's a detective, oftentimes, as with most detective fiction, the criminal is, like, really the one you're following.
Yeah.
And it's, like, the most interesting element of the story, because they're the most kind of proactive character, and the detective is following along and putting pieces together. And I don't know if I would call this a detective story, but that aspect of the Batman character is used effectively here to keep him on the sidelines, while you're really focusing on Catwoman and Penguin as like the main motivators for the film.
Yeah, I actually think this movie has a clearer sense of how it wants to deploy and use Batman than almost any other live-action Batman movie.
Yeah, I would generally agree. I mean, certainly of between this and the 89 one, I think this is a much better usage of this character within the context of its movie.
I just feel like whenever Batman or Bruce Wayne, Michael Keaton is on screen, I feel like it knows it has a purpose for what it's doing with him. And I think that's not true of any of the others in this 90s series. And I think the Chris Nolan movies are up and down on that. Batman Begins obviously is razor sharp on that because he's just the main character.
Yeah.
The Dark Knight, I think, mostly gets it, but has some weirdness. And then Dark Knight Rises has no idea what it's doing about anything. So, like, this one does stand out for me on that. Because what it's doing is Batman is sort of a cipher and a reflective surface off of everything else. And things are reflecting onto him and off of him. And he's in the middle of all this. And I think as good as Michael Keaton is in that first one, I think the genius of that casting really shows here. Because there's something about the quiet, bizarre stoicism Michael Keaton brings to it, where he is also a freak. He's just a freak who hides it better.
Yeah.
And that's what this movie is kind of about. But you have these two big, flashy villains in Catwoman and Penguin, and then you have Max Shrek as this kind of side villain. And one thing I also think this movie is remarkable at is, superhero movies are littered with the movies, and it's a meme at this point, of the movies that have too many villains. Spider-Man 3 has 3 villains, and it's too many, because maybe 3 too many because none of them are done well in that movie. Although they all have, other than Venom has no potential in that movie, but the other two have potential.
Yes.
But you have that. You have the various X-Men movies that have too many villains.
Amazing Spider-Man 2 is maybe like the pinnacle of this to me. It's just like, you have no idea what you're doing with any of your characters.
Right. But this movie, perfect. That it has 2.5-ish villains, however you want to describe it. Christopher Walken is a major presence. But it has 3 villains, and I can't imagine it without any of them. That is what the movie is. And I can't think of another big multi-villain superhero movie that does that, because Spider-Man 2 is perfect with its villains, but it's got 1 villain.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the thing of where it's because the different way they use Batman compared to other superhero characters makes that space to have more villain characters, right? There's only so much oxygen in a movie to be given to major characters, and so it's you have to balance that out. And here, because of the way they use Batman, and because Batman as a character is set up to effectively be used this way, you give less oxygen to him and give it more to distribute it to these 2 other villains.
But it's also just a tight script, like the cause and effect of Max Shrek doesn't literally create the Penguin, but he brings the Penguin to the fore. And he also creates Catwoman, and Catwoman wants to kill Max Shrek, and Penguin and Max Shrek are scheming together, and Batman, through Bruce Wayne, has a whole thing against Max Shrek because of this power plant idea, but he also has this thing about Penguin because he sees something of himself in Penguin, and that makes him suspicious of Penguin, and he has the hots for Selena Kyle because he's a fuckboy horn dog. It's all the pieces connect in different orders, and that's really well done. And there's no other multi-villain superhero movie where I feel like the threads are that well tied. Yeah,
there's a clear focus and progression to how everything fits together into its puzzle.
So I feel like the easiest way to start talking about this movie is to talk about the characters. Because they're fucking weird.
Yeah.
Should we start with the Penguin, because that's where the movie starts and ends?
Sure, yeah.
Essentially. Well, it ends with Catwoman, but Penguin blows up good. And then dies and has a penguin funeral.
Yeah, they take the penguin part of the Penguin very literally in this movie. I love.
The thing that is so fascinating to me about the Penguin is that the normal way most modern Batman media deals with the Penguin is it kind of de-penguinizes him and makes him just kind of a weird-looking mob boss.
Yeah.
And this movie goes, no, as silly as Burgess Meredith was, we're going to go sillier. We're going to go grosser and crazier. And he has fin hands. And he is this. And you have Danny DeVito in this weird fat suit that makes him look like a fucking roly-poly.
Yeah, he looks like a fucking egg or something.
Yes. Yeah. This is what you would do actual Eggman in a Sonic movie, is you would get Danny DeVito, put him in that suit, and give him a big handlebar mustache.
Yeah.
Now I want that. God damn it, we're never going to get that.
Well, eventually we'll get our Sonic the Hedgehog multiverse movie. We'll have that Eggman and the Jim Carrey one. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So you have all of that. He does not do Burgess Meredith's thing that he's always doing, but
he gets close.
He gets close.
Yeah.
He's always doing grunts and groans. He eats raw fish. He has Penguin Penguin don't have sharp teeth. What am I talking about? They have beaks.
Yeah.
He has like these weird like animal teeth. They go for it in a way. Can you think of another comic book villain that was done more heightened on film than he was in the actual comics?
I mean, no, but you're right. Like that's what they've done. Like,
Yes.
because this isn't really what Penguin is like in anything else. Like, I've never encountered another piece of Batman media where they just go, fuck it. Where like to the point where it's like you would not be surprised if his backstory was actually he had been bitten by a radioactive penguin, right? Like that's like how far they take it with how like extreme the characterization is.
Yeah, I mean, what they do, and this is, to my knowledge, not the backstory of the Penguin in any other version, is that he was a son of a rich family in Gotham. He was born deformed. His parents throw him off a bridge. He is raised by penguins in a zoo. And again, this is our first signal. Do not take this movie on the level of reality. Yeah. It does not hold together. That's not what it's trying to do. This is German expressionism.
Yeah.
You have your Caligari poster up there over there, Sean. That is more of a touchstone to this movie than, Batman 89 was, frankly.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, so you have all of that. He grows up through... I'd actually totally forgotten this part of it, but Batman figures out that he has been building a criminal empire kind of across the country.
Yes,
through different circuses.
Circuses, yeah.
So he has this gang called the Red Triangle, and he's coming back to Gotham. His ultimate plan, we learn, is to kill all the firstborn sons of Gotham, but he gets sidelined by Max Shrek having this mayor plan. And that's the Penguin. And I want to look this up. There were so many actors in contention for this role. This is something they were always considering, like, because I think Penguin is a more minor villain now, but at the time this was made, he was in that tier with, Joker and Riddler and all those of like, because he was in the 66 series, Burgess Meredith, big influence on this movie. All of the Penguin's mayoral posters are just the Burgess Meredith version drawn, which I love. He's even got the cigarette holder thing and everything. So you've got all of that. So the Penguin was famous. Sean, would you like to guess who the classic Hollywood actor was they first offered the role of Penguin to?
I have no idea.
Dustin Hoffman.
What?
He was originally the first choice before declining.
Man, what a different movie that would be.
Yes.
What a completely different... Because Dustin Hoffman is a fine actor. He can't do what Danny DeVito does in this film.
Yes. So they also thought of... This is all on the Wikipedia page. They considered Marlon Brando, John Candy, Bob Hoskins, that would have worked, Ralph Waite, Dean Martin, Dudley Moore, Alan Rickman, John Goodman, Phil Collins the singer, Charles Grodin,
John Goodman is like 7 feet tall.
Yeah.
How do you do John Goodman as the Penguin? It's like, I love John Goodman to death, and in other contexts he'd be good at it. But...
Well, if you thought that, Sean, what about Christopher Lee? He would have been a great Max Shrek.
Yes, he would have been a fantastic Max Shrek.
But no, Joe Pesci and Ray Liotta, both of those make sense. Christopher Lloyd from Back to the Future. Okay. These were all considered. This is not like they cast these people. These were just considered. DeVito was actually recommended by Jack Nicholson. He and him were friends. So that is, I think, Jack Nicholson's best contribution to the Batman movies, more than his own performance, because Danny DeVito was born to play this fucking part, and he is so good.
Yeah, it's impossible to imagine any other actor playing the character. Like, it's any other actor, you'd have to make, I feel like a different character for that actor to play.
And I think Danny DeVito accomplishes something Nicholson doesn't in the first movie, in that Nicholson does have, as we talked about, certain things that could be a distinguishing factor for the Joker, but he mostly falls back on a Cesar Romero impression. Mm-hmm. Burgess Meredith's Penguin is obviously influential to this movie, but at no point do you feel like DeVito is doing a Burgess Meredith impression.
No, because at no point did Burgess Meredith bite someone's nose off,
Yes.
Or calling it innuendos, I feel like is doing a disservice to the word innuendo in terms of how blatant it is.
Penguin walks up to Catwoman, stretched out on his bed, and says, "There's the pussy I'm looking for."
Yes.
I mean, that was the biggest surprise for me, Sean, watching the movie again, is I had completely forgotten how sexual this movie is.
Like, I remembered some of it. I feel like I had always remembered the line that Penguin has where he says, I'd fill her void. I'd show her my French flipper trick.
Yes.
Like, the French flipper trick is such a gross line. That's like, that line has always kind of stuck with me, but I forgot just how, like, it's the whole movie is stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah, it is like really blatant.
From Penguin
blatant.
and Catwoman.
Yes.
Yeah. And repressed from Bruce Wayne, because there's this whole way to read the movie that they are different parts of Bruce Wayne's repressions that are let loose, you know? Because Bruce Wayne is also a horn dog in this movie.
Yes. He is definitely extremely horny for Catwoman in this movie.
Yeah. But yeah, Danny DeVito is so good in this. It's weird. I always have trouble pinning down how old Danny DeVito is because he seems like he has been eternally like 55.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Because it's okay. When this movie was made, he would have been about 50, I guess. Yeah, I'm doing my math right. He was like 48 when this movie was made. But he could be like any age. He could have been 30 with makeup. He could have been 60. Who knows? He's very ageless in this movie. Penguin is supposed to be 33 in the plot of the movie. But it is such a physical transformation. The voice he's got, everything about it. And I know Penguin turns a lot of people off. That is like, if you ask people who don't like Batman Returns, what is the barrier to entry? It is the Penguin, 100%, because he has stuff dripping from his mouth.
Yeah.
He is constantly saying like horrible sexual things. He has eaten fish. It is fucking bizarre. But for me, like, yeah, give me that. It is fucking weird.
I think there is something to be said about like I wish the movie was a little bit more self-critical in how it uses things like deformity to like sort of mark villainy and evil. Particularly that it's like, I mean, it's nothing in the movie implies that like, because so let's back up for this because it's kind of like a bigger point. But so a very classic kind of like, and this is very gothic, like sort of marker for villainy is some version of physical deformity, right? And it's like probably the thing people are most familiar with is Hunchback of Notre Dame. Only people aren't familiar with that because they're familiar with the Disney version, which is very different. But like it's that sort of like tradition, and this goes back forever of giving a character like Richard III is maybe another very good touchstone with Shakespeare, who probably invented versions of physical deformities that Richard III, he would have known Richard III did not really have, to villainize the character. And oftentimes what we do in more modern fiction, if we want to use those tropes and complicate them, is to have the core theme be a Beauty and the Beast-esque thing of like the reason why the character behaves this way is not because of the deformity, it's because of the way society has treated them as a result of the deformity. But that is explicitly not the case in this movie because Penguin eats a fucking cat when he's a baby in a cage, right? Like it's like he is grotesqueness personified, and I think there's a certain realm in which the movie is so extreme, it's like it can get away with some of it. But it was part of like transitioning into the third act of where I started to feel less okay with the movie, is I do think it goes so far with it that it's like, I really wish the movie had some stuff in it that was more critically analyzing the way it's using that trope.
I don't think it brings it into the text, like on the top layer. I do think like there is and this is always kind of how I've seen the movie, is this social criticism of the Penguin is this ugly, grotesque thing in humanity that is repressed. And it is this very Freudian thing of he is literally thrown into a sewer and kept down there. And that feeds his grotesqueness and makes him this like avatar for all of these awful excesses. Like you can basically see the 7 deadly sins in him, you know? And like he is all of these things, and then he comes back out and wreaks havoc. And into this exploding realm. And like I do think there is a pretty clear line drawn between him and Bruce Wayne where like there is a real ugliness in how Batman immediately, when Penguin is giving him nothing to actually be suspicious about, is suspicious about this guy. And he is proven right in so much as he does turn out to be a criminal. And I do think there is something I do wish the third act more firmly put a cap on. Batman is kind of awful in this movie. In his own like prejudices, and that he is absolutely just as freakish and monstrous as the Penguin. He just looks fucking handsome and sublimates it. And all of this is stuff that he fucking keeps underneath himself. I agree that I think the third act is the part of this movie where it kind of loses the thematic thread on a lot of that. But yeah, it's tough to say because I agree in general that the physical deformity stuff, like I will never understand why Ari Aster gets a pass on this in Hereditary and Midsommar, which like do it as blatantly as I've ever seen it done, which is just deformity is weird and evil. And that's just what those movies are about. And I don't really get the like that there's not more of a discussion about that, because I find it very gross. But I don't know. It's part of the register of this movie that lets it work for me, but I do see where you're coming from.
Yeah, like I think it works for me for those first 2/3, and I think it is specifically the like weird fallback. Oh, but he's just going to murder all the firstborn sons of Gotham, and like that whole turn. It's like I feel like a lot of the movie sort of loses what it's trying to talk about, and I think that's also where like I can see what you're saying about the connection between Penguin and Batman, but I feel like it becomes so tenuous. And I think they do just fall back on Batman being a very just heroic figure, with like his taking off the mask and be like, no, we have to arrest him. We can't like blah, 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 blah. And it's like he becomes very like Batman-y. And I don't feel like the movies. I feel like the movie loses its critical edge at that point to me.
So I understand
all the things that like felt problematic, but I think the movie was working in such an extreme sense and was existing in such a like psychological reality that was not real. It like worked for me, and then a lot of that stuff starts to kind of collapse once you get into the ending.
Yeah, I mean, this is tough because so much of what I think is my reading of this movie is not like explicitly in the text. It is not stuff that is said. It is not about the plotting. It is in the mise en scène and the acting and things like that, which, I mean, they're parts of the text, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
Like, so much of how I read it is like, this is such an awful version of Gotham City, and by awful I mean it looks fucking cool, and this has even better production design than the last movie, but like this is an irredeemable place that like has no, like it is like some kind of hell personified. It is this German expressionist kind of landscape. You know, the public is viewed as so like kind of fickle in this movie and going back and forth. You have like, I don't think there's any character, including Batman, who ever feels purely heroic to me because, and I don't know if this, I have no idea if this is intentional, but there's a lot about like Bruce Wayne in this movie and him like checking out Catwoman and hitting on her and abandoning heroic duties like on Christmas Eve to go to the ball to fuck Selena Kyle and like all of this stuff. And he also just seems so kind of feckless in so many scenes where he's in the suit, where he is this big icon, but then sometimes he seems so small. And all of this, it's stuff that I don't know if I can even firmly put into words. It just works for me on this level of that like Freudian dreamscape in a certain sense.
Yeah, like and like I said, I think I agree with a lot of that. I think again with the third act, part of where it starts to fall apart is the choice to have Penguin not succeed in his mayoral candidacy. I think it's like a fundamental flaw with the script, because I think it's like it doesn't register with the rest of the themes of the movie, because I would generally agree with you that it's like this Gotham is like Gotham itself feels grotesque in so much of the film, and yet the Batman playing these like very sort of whatever clips, like they're not even like that bad, and maybe it's partially like living under Trump,
yes,
but it's like, but it's important to know this like Trump as a political phenomenon is not unique. He's relatively unique for America specifically, but in the political landscape, like it's not anything new.
You know, but this is also my biggest complaint about the two-parter from the Adam West show I was talking about. It also goes down this same route where it has everything ready for the social critique that would be most biting, and in the end it goes with, but the voters do the right thing in the end when presented with the evidence.
Yeah,
and that's the problem.
Yeah, and that's the problem. I think it that is exacerbated when you are living in this weird like Freudian hellscape.
I mean, Trump has said like those exact fucking things from the tape, and like it makes his supporters love him more somehow.
Yeah, and there's something about like a lot of what the movie's doing in terms of its Freudian element is and as you talked about earlier, like Penguin obviously is this representation of the id, the like buried subconscious of like all the, I mean, this is what he literally says is like all the things you flush are what I flaunt, right? Like the things you put down the toilet is what I put on my mantelpiece. That's like are all the things that we repress, dismiss, discard in ourselves in society or want to ignore. Like those are what he embodies. And so so much of the movie feels like it is about that rising and exploding out from underneath Gotham, and that never happens because the mayoral candidacy fails. And then and at that point it feels like the main threat of the movie has actually just been dealt with. And so you have to have this weird sort of fallback plan of the firstborn son thing, which doesn't, to me, register in that Freudian space in any like meaningful way. And like the like larger, like it feels like the movie shrinks in that way, in a way it should be exploding.
I do think there's a tension in the movie between the social commentary and satire, which I think is lost in the last act, and the interpersonal struggle, which I think I like how it resolves quite a bit, where especially if you kind of view it as Batman is this like prism refracting things, but also in some reading these are all parts of him that are like acting out against each other, and he is the last one standing because he's successfully blown it all up. I mean, there is something I love in the operatic expressionist quality of the way this movie ends, is at that zoo set, which is one of the best sets in movie history. Like, there is that shot early in the movie where you go to meet the Penguin in his underground lair, and it does this big flying shot all around the zoo and like the trees and everything. And watching that shot, I went out loud to Thomas, I said, how the fuck are they doing this camera movement? And then it got in close enough that I'm like, oh, that's a miniature. And it makes more sense because, you know, it might even be a stop motion shot. I don't know. But like, it's an amazing, amazing shot. And that space is used so well through that final fight. And that underground lair with like the murky, gross water and the big bird cage he puts Christopher Walken in, and the big electrical outlet thing that Catwoman kisses Christopher Walken to death with, and all of this. And the ending really for me is this like battling ids that just all destroy each other. And it just comes fucking collapsing down. And then you're left with a Batman who is like shaken, and then is back in his car being normal again, having just sublimated it again. And there's something very powerful for me about that. But it does definitely sort of lose its biting like edge it had, I think, at a social satire level. Yeah, and that's where, and I think this also partially comes down to what has always been like one of the major differences between us. That like you have your weird, gross sex stuff. I have my like heightened. You are giving too much of this to me and not the field I'm in. But okay. I mean, you chose the fucking field. I have my enlightened social commentary and Marxism. Of the literary field. Yeah. No, for some reason, film studies is still stuck in psychoanalysis, and I'll never figure it out. And the part is, it's like movies do like to play in this space because I think movies are particularly good at it. But it's like, but for me as a viewer, I am always going to want. I never want that to be like the whole thing, I guess. Especially when like the movie has not only been that for a lot of it. So it's like if like it sort of abandoning some of the stuff of like, I mean, most of the Max Shrek, like the power station, all that stuff just kind of eventually just sort of, I think technically they are underneath the power station, so it is kind of in there. But like most of that stuff feels like it's just has kind of been jettisoned when it's no longer good for setting up plot stuff. It is the only concession to mainstream Hollywood realities I think this movie has, arguably, is that it does not follow through on a social critique that, if done, would be a direct indictment of the people watching it. And that is like the third rail Hollywood doesn't touch. Yeah. Is the indict the audience as stupid and feckless and fickle. And I think that's what the movie should do at a certain point, because that's what it's about. Penguin explicitly is not, he is just evil for evil's sake. He is a creation of, even if it's not literal, like, yes, as a baby he eats the cat, but like, the idea is that he is this repressed thing that we have shoved underneath. Mm-hmm. And then he comes back and plays us like the harp from hell. And if it did all of that, that would be so fascinating. But I also think this about the Batman 66 episode that doesn't go there. It comes close to going there, and then it doesn't, because ultimately Hollywood movies are supposed to make you feel good. Batman Returns does not make you feel good. Yeah. But it also does not make you feel as bad as it could. Is that fair? Yes, because like it ultimately is not, it never rises to sort of like truly, I think, like challenge or try to like radicalize the status quo. Like it ultimately just sort of like let everything sort of just settle and simmer, and it just feels like weirdly neat and clean. And that's part of where that like third act just like weirdness comes from. And to me, a lot of that is just centered around this sort of like fundamental choice of abandoning the mayor stuff way too early in the scripting process of like, if that had followed through, because that is, to me, that is like, that's like the plot of the movie really is about the Penguin is trying to become mayor, and Batman and Catwoman are either trying to stop him or help him in like weird ways around that. But that's like the core conceit of the film, it feels like. And then it just sort of gets jettisoned because it feels like they maybe didn't know what to do, or it would have been
too radical to have like followed that through to its conclusion.
I mean, there's kind of two options. You have him fail, as you do here, or you have him win, and then it's just there's the easy Hollywood way to tell that story doesn't exist. Now, for the most part, Batman Returns does nothing that is easy or Hollywood. Yeah. But,
it should be said, I do feel like if the movie had managed to pull off like what it truly sets up, it would be the best superhero movie. Like it would like be such an incredible masterpiece, instead of being like what it feels like is like a flawed masterpiece, which is kind of how
I think that's how I describe it too. And you can love a flawed masterpiece.
Yes.
People do. And there's so much I love about this. But when you talk about like things it maybe drops or doesn't follow through, I do think one thing it follows through on, more or less, is a lot of the stuff with Catwoman. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like I know this because I feel like I follow so many like women of like our age, maybe a little older, for whom Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman is such a major touchstone. Yeah. Of like some kind of like weird radical feminism on screen that is like kind of uncompromising and sexy but weird and like so many different, and I don't feel fully qualified to talk about it. There's plenty of great articles that I would go tell you to seek out, but it is extremely striking, and it is not hard for me, especially I think now, like also in like a 2010s and 2020s context. I feel like a lot of what she's doing has only become more relevant of how they do this character. So let's talk about Catwoman. Yeah. Because she's fascinating. She's played by Michelle Pfeiffer, but that was actually a last-minute decision. Let me see who it was who was originally cast. It was Annette Bening was originally cast as Catwoman. And they were going to film with her until she got pregnant. And then, the Hollywood train does not stop. You do not pause for a pregnant woman. Mm-hmm. Today, you CGI it out, as they have done with like Scarlet Widow. Black Widow in Avengers 2, Played by Scarlett Johansson, yes. You see why I was confused. Yeah. She was pregnant, but you can work around that now. I guess they couldn't then. Annette Bening dropped out. Pfeiffer came on like kind of last minute. Got a $3 million salary, which was $2 million more than what was offered to Bening. So good for Michelle Pfeiffer for this last minute thing. But
I would, if you could pay me $3 million to whip dudes in the face, I'd do it.
Yeah. She became Catwoman, and good God, Michelle Pfeiffer is good in this movie.
Yeah, she's phenomenal. It is a brilliant performance.
Brilliant performance, and like every level of it, I think the way this has one of the best and most economic villain creation stories to me, and it feels honestly very influential to like how Raimi does villain origins in the Spider-Man movies. Yeah. It's not that many scenes, and it's done at kind of this mythological operatic register, so you can just kind of roll with it. You can very much draw a line between some of this and like the Doc Ock horror birth. I mean, good God. But yeah, so you have her as this secretary made up as like, and I think part of what really works for a lot of women, and it doesn't just have to be women, obviously, but people who really respond to this character I've seen is the camp aspect of it, of that you start with her as like such a ridiculously heightened version of like the spinster secretary. Yes. I hate to use those words, but like that's what it's making fun of it to a certain degree. But she comes home and it's like, honey, I'm home. Oh, right, I'm not married.
Yeah, there's the way that she's talking to herself for the first 30 minutes of the movie that I love.
Yep. She's got the mother who is like judgmental on the answering machine. Her hair is like really frizzy. Her like business work pantsuit is like kind of ill-fitting.
Yeah, she's got the like message from her ex-boyfriend that like something went wrong.
But he just left her on a fucking whim. Yes. It's great. Yeah. Yeah. And all of this stuff. And then, of course, she finds out this, and she tries to kind of use her voice in the meeting with Max Shrek, and he just completely shoots her down. And it is very sad. That scene is not particularly outdated 30 years later. Yeah. I mean, things have come a long way in some ways, but, those boardrooms exist, and that exact scenario probably happens.
Patriarchy, unfortunately, has yet to be dismantled.
Yes, exactly. So you've got just this super dismissive Christopher Walken. She goes back to the office as a dutiful worker to try to figure something out. She learns too much, and so Max Shrek, in a phenomenal scene, pushes her out the window. The way that scene plays, with eerie Christopher Walken pushing her towards the window, you've got Danny Elfman's score like rising and rising, and he kind of goes, boo. And he's like, I wasn't going to. And she's like, oh, thank God, thank God. And then just all of a sudden he pushes her out.
That's very Raimi Spider-Man, yeah.
It's such a well-constructed scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, and then I love that they get on with this right away of the, like, mythological cat thing that she has 9 lives. Because there's no way she survives that fall, let alone stands up and walks back to her apartment. But she does. And all these cats are around her. She goes back and drinks a gallon of milk. And then there's a whole I find milk, like, very gross. I don't know what this is. You can try to psychoanalyze me.
Yeah, it's your weird sex stuff again.
Okay.
It's well documented on this podcast.
I don't think it has anything to do with sex, but whatever.
Sure
And then, so like, that's like a very kind of grotesque sequence. And then making out of this leather jacket the Catwoman suit that is all fucking gnarly and has
like
all that
stitched together. Yeah,
it's a really good suit.
Yeah, it's just that whole sequence. Because it really is just like one long like sequence of like these mirrored scenes.
Yeah.
Because she just goes like kind of backwards through the scene again, only as like this weird zombie. I love their commitment to like whenever she's in the Catwoman costume, like she looks dead, like she's like pale and cold. And yeah, like that whole. Yeah, you're right. That like there's this sort of like mythical quality to it where it feels like she has been resurrected, like by some weird like. And she keeps dying over the course of the movie, and she has. Yeah, they keep on having men drop her from high places, leading to I think maybe my favorite sequence with her is like the last time that happens when the penguin does it to her and she lands in that like greenhouse or whatever and screams and the whole thing explodes.
That is so expressionist. That is just such a. There's so much this movie is operating on that register. I said this on Twitter last night when I was watching it, that like there are plenty of American movies that pay homage to like German expressionism. I think Burton here is one of the only directors who's genuinely internalized it in like a systemic way through his movie.
Yeah.
You definitely get that here. I want to talk about the costume for a second because this is such a great paragraph on Wikipedia. It's pretty well sourced, so this is all from like the making of stuff. More than 60 latex cat suits were created for the 6-month shoot at $1,000 each. They spent $60,000 on cat suits. The initial concept for the design came from Burton, who envisioned a stuffed cat with its stitches coming apart at the seams. And that is done, and it is done extremely effectively.
Yeah.
Because that suit just gets gnarlier over the course of the movie. The prototype was created around a body cast of Pfeiffer so that it would fit her exactly and painted with white silicone rubber to imitate stitches. It was extremely tight and very laborious to put on. Michelle Pfeiffer had to be covered in talcum powder to squeeze into the costume, which was in turn brushed with liquid silicone on every take to give it shine. She might wear the suit for 12 to 14 hours at a time, except lunch breaks when it was removed, which was her only opportunity to use the bathroom during the workday.
Well, maybe they should have made a couple compromises in the costume design. That feels like maybe it's a really good looking costume. You maybe do some slight modifications to make it so that she doesn't have to be covered in talcum powder and can take a piss more than once a day.
Yeah. She made $3 million.
Sure.
No, I'm kidding. You should treat your workers well, no matter what they're making. But, yes.
Feminist theme, movies that have feminist themes should have feminist working models, is my belief for films. Unfortunately,
even the ones that don't have feminist themes.
Well, yes, I mean, all movies should, but it is, like, particularly hypocritical when a movie is, has feminist themes, and then it's like, and then we murdered Michelle Pfeiffer by strangling her in leather.
Yes. To be fair, with that, this did not have the talcum powder thing. I think Michael Keaton had the exact same problem in the bat suit. I do not think that has a fly on it.
Well, I read the Wikipedia page as well last night, and they said that they gave him a zipper so he could take a piss.
Okay, well then, they could have done it for Michelle Pfeiffer. What the hell?
Yeah, which is a funny contrast of reading those two.
And it was new. Okay, so in the first movie, he did not have that. They added it for the sequel. Okay, that's great. Okay, that's a pretty good example of how Hollywood works. Huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but yes, Michelle Pfeiffer, so good, and God, she does such a great job embracing the like punniness of it all. I am Catwoman. Hear me roar. I love her first scene where she's fucking flipping around and finds the woman who's being like assaulted by the guy, cuts the guy up, and then turns on the woman and is like just waiting for Batman to save you. There's something like just so weirdly brutal and uncompromising and just flown again, just straight out of an id is what she becomes.
Yeah.
She is this repressed thing inside of Selena Kyle and then just comes bursting out. And I think that's part of like the fantasy of Catwoman, especially in like some of the takes on this from women I've seen, is just like there's some kind of role play fantasy to just Breaking Bad like this that the movie does so well. And she has fewer scenes in the movie than I remembered. Not that I think she's underserved or anything, but just like her scenes count for so much when she's there, whether she's across from, and she really does have the connections to everyone in this movie. I mean, everyone has connections to everyone, but she has memorable scenes with Penguin, Shrek, and Bruce Wayne and Batman, both sides of him. And I love that first interaction where Batman saves her, but she's just Selena Kyle.
Yeah.
That one's really good.
Yes, and then she fucking picks up the stun gun and just shocks that dude on the ground.
Yeah, it's very good. So yeah, I mean, what else to say about Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman here while we're on it?
Well, I think like one thing is they just do such a meticulous job of setting up all facets of the character that like with that stun gun thing, or the fact that she is like excessively like from the perspective of Max Shrek, excessively curious, right? Like she's clearly interested in not just being an executive assistant / secretary, right? That
she's very proud of calling herself an assistant, not a secretary.
Yes,
even.
that she's incredibly smart. And is just not being given any credit or like a space at the table just because she's a woman. And they do a good job of setting that up for that to be part of what like explodes in her, right? Like you can see, and they don't have they it's very efficient. That it's like you get it in like a couple of key moments where you can see this in her. You can see the frustration. You can see that she deserves to be in a place so much more than where she is, and there's just nothing she can do about it. And the fact that they get that across in like 2 or 3 scenes is incredibly impressive, both in the writing and Michelle Pfeiffer's performance, and like that continuity through to how she plays that in Catwoman. It's just like so like meticulous is the word I would use to describe it. Of it's very like thoughtful and detailed. Even
down to the way they do the gymnastics stuff. Like I know if this movie came out today, it wouldn't. But if it came out today, Twitter would be alight with a bunch of dumb dudes going, but she wasn't a gymnast. We don't know how she learned to do all those kick flips. Using a whip isn't easy. That's like, she wasn't like a dominatrix or anything. How did she learn to use the whip? This doesn't make sense. And it doesn't, because this is not the fucking point. The point is she is like repressed and hurting, and she is held down by the world. And when it explodes out, it even explodes out into a physical flexibility that she did not have before. And it is kind of magical, but that's the idea. It is, everything in this movie is an expression of something psychological. And so her exploding into like this series of flips and doing all the whipping and stuff, no, you don't need to see the one-to-one Selena Kyle, like this is what Dark Knight Rises does. She's a cat burglar and she's all flexible because she does all this stuff. That's not the point. And that's not what's powerful about the character here.
Oh, and then also I think like the way the character's built up is like, I feel like you can very easily believe like, she did do something like gymnastics in high school. Like she is like physically capable. She just is never able to. That is suppressed in her the same way that her intellect is. Like it is like she has to be, because this is the position society has made for her and is forcing her to fit into. She has to be quiet and demure and like not like being physically or intellectually provocative or dangerous in any way. And those are the things that then she discards to become Catwoman is that inhibition, or she takes on these inhibitions.
And I have no idea like how intentional all of this was on Tim Burton and Daniel Waters' part, like writing the movie. Something about it feels like you take the script and the direction, you take Michelle Pfeiffer's performance, you take the costume design and the choreography and all the different collaborators involved, and some kind of magic chemistry came out where there is an actually pretty like powerful like feminist statement being made with this movie through that character that I don't necessarily know, because Tim Burton doesn't really do this in his other movies. I don't think he's like an actively sexist director or anything, but like no more than other Hollywood directors, but like that's just not a huge part of his work, I don't think. And it works here. It's beautiful. It's amazingly done. I think Michelle Pfeiffer should be the first and main person praised for it, but it is a lot of collaboration and it is amazingly done. And to me, the most satisfying part of the ending is her resolution with Max Shrek, and we bring back the taser, and it is just this incredibly strange, crazy, gothic explosion at the end. It feels like it could be in a Frankenstein movie. Of her, a very psychosexual Frankenstein movie.
Well, I'll show you a Frankenstein movie.
It's a very explicit one.
Yeah.
Where she takes the fucking taser and holds on to the electricity beam, and she fucking takes her tongue out and starts kissing Max Shrek and electrocutes him to death. And then we do get to see the fried fucking charred body after
Yes,
that.
his like weird fucking Raider of the Last Ark looking ass. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically it looks like they took the fucking model from the end of Last Crusade.
Yes, Last Crusade. Yes, that's what I was thinking of.
Put it on set. Oh, it's so good. And I think Batman standing there and watching it and taking the mask off, which I do love that Batman taking the mask off means he has to rip the cowl off the rubber.
It's this moment of like where it feels like they wrote that part in the script and didn't think about what the costume was. Or like, well, it takes us about 2 hours to take the costume off of Michael Keaton. So how are we going to do this? And we can't like have like a 2 hours later and then he's got the costume off or whatever.
It's okay, just wait, Catwoman. Give me 2 hours. I'm going to get out of this cowl.
Do you have any talcum powder on you? Weird question, I know.
Yes. But I actually think there's something about it that really works for me.
Yeah.
And it is so kind of gnarly of him ripping it off. And it's just the idea of like it being a mask he has to rip off, not take off. Because it is like glued to him in some way. And it is this merging of Bruce Wayne and Batman in a way that like in an imagistic sense, I don't think any other Batman movie has pulled off. Where, you know, because in the Chris Nolan movies, when he takes it off, it's like military hardware. He just takes it off, and there's not, like, imagine the scene in Dark Knight where he's, like, mourning Rachel, and he's in the fucking penthouse and everything, and he has the cowl on his lap. If it were like this, and it was, like, ripped around the seams, and he had it off, that would be a way more powerful image to me.
Yeah.
And it's a good image in the Chris Nolan movie, but there's something about that really works. And then her just going for broke with this electrocution. It is a towering, amazing image, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's something with Catwoman here, and this is true of Catwoman as a character, like, writ large. It's true of a lot of female characters in comic book stuff, like superhero stuff, is there's, like, this very fine line between a character like this feeling, like, transgressive in its politics and, like challenging in its politics and being regressive in the way that it sexualizes the character, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and you get and like for all these characters, it's true of Wonder Woman, it's true of Catwoman, it's true of Black Cat and Spider-Man. Like they, depending on the version and stuff like that, and who's making it, like they can waffle on either side of that line. And here, like it feels very definitively on the like transgressive and challenging side of it.
I think that's the best way to put it,
yeah.
and I think that really defines why the character still has such a legacy. You know, it made me think of, you know, there's this meme video from Batman Arkham City where it's Catwoman and Batman walking out of the prison. I think it's the police station.
Yeah.
And it's in the actual scene, Catwoman is doing her like sexy strutting and like moving her arms and stuff, and Batman is being stoic, but someone has, to make a gender critique, swapped the models in the game, and so it's the same animation, but now Batman is like rubbing his chest and doing all this stuff, and it just shows out like it's like the male gaze in one image.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I do think the Arkham games in general suffer with their female characters because they hypersexualize Harley Quinn and Catwoman and all this stuff. And I think hypersexualization is an inherent part of Catwoman, and it goes back to the 60s series and comics and all this stuff. But like, there's a way to do it that feels transgressive, and there's a way to do it that feels regressive. And I think that video has kind of proved to me it feels regressive in Arkham City, because I don't know what statement it's making in that scene.
And part of that is like the audience is so distant from that version of Catwoman because there's very little material. Like part of what makes it transgressive here is that we know who Selina Kyle is. We understand her place in the world, and we see these sort of like, we see the critique of the patriarchy and the patriarchal systems in that first 30 minutes, in the position she's in the world, and like the intractability of that position. And so that when she is able to break out of it and all these different facets through the guise of Catwoman, that's what like pushes it over the edge, because we have humanized this character and we care about her as a person, as well as this sort of symbol. Whereas like oftentimes those characters, because you're focused so entirely on the male main character's point of view, they are sexualized for the benefit of Batman or Spider-Man or whoever, right? And here that is not the case. And that's like what makes that difference.
It's her POV. We mostly see her from her POV. Even in scenes with Batman, because her POV is so well established, if anything, they're sharing that POV, but also if anything, like there is a way to read this movie with her as the protagonist. I really think you can. I think just because she gets so much more clear, like, psychological realism and motivation and introduction in a way you're kept at more of a distance from certainly Penguin and in some ways Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she has a fuller, like, expository introduction than Bruce or Batman do in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would say that, like, the protagonist duties are shared between her and Batman.
Yes.
Like, I think you can't really pin it down to one of either of them.
No, and honestly, it's part of why the movie works, is that it doesn't have that single POV. But she gets that, and, you know, Michelle Pfeiffer, Catwoman, I think is on the short list of the best comic book movie villains ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, to the point where, like, I don't know if I call her a villain in this movie, really, right?
But, like,
she's a villain only because she's fighting Batman for part of the movie.
Antagonist, maybe, is what you would say. But yeah, like, you know, I would... But in that, like, performative space, it's up there with Alfred Molina. It's up there with Willem Dafoe, whatever other great comic book movie villains you want to say. Heath
Michael
Ledger's
B.
Joker.
Jordan in Black Panther,
That one's actually a really good comparison, because there's something similar on a racial dynamic there that movie gets.
Yes.
And he's much more clearly the antagonist because he's trying to kill a bunch of people, but, like, he is also right in a way that she is also right.
Yeah.
You know? And I also love that so the final scene where you have Catwoman kind of come back at the end and look up at the Batman symbol, that was a really late addition to the movie. It was not in the script. It was not in the original production. It was when they edited the movie, they felt they needed a better sting. And so that's not Michelle Pfeiffer. That's a body double, and they shot it, and they put it in at the last minute. You can kind of tell because it's very clearly composited on in the image. But I can't imagine the movie without it, because I think without it, the one thing where it would become regressive is her dying.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
But she doesn't die. She just keeps living. She gets shot, and she gets electrified, and she falls from 3 different roofs, and she is the one still standing in a way where even Batman feels kind of defeated at the end. And she's not. And that's really key to this movie.
Yeah, I agree. That, like, if she had to be destroyed at the end, I agree that, like, it would have bothered me a lot. And yeah, that it is a small moment, but it's a really key moment that she survives, which then also eventually paves the road for eventually getting the Halle Berry Catwoman movie. Which was something that, like, when I was looking through the Wikipedia page to, like, see some of the history of this film, I was like, oh, right, I guess, of course it would, like, the production roots of that movie would obviously trace back to Batman Returns. I had just never thought about it that way.
Yeah, if you don't know, the plan was always to have a Catwoman spin-off, and that's part of why, that's another part of, as my understanding is why they did the shot of her alive at the end, was just the very practical reality of they wanted her to be alive. And Daniel Waters wrote a Catwoman script, and the whole plot of that script is she goes off to, I forget the name of the city, but it's like another comic book city.
Bloodhaven?
It's not Bloodhaven, because it's nicer than that. Bloodhaven is, like, shitty, right?
Metropolis. Yeah, Bloodhaven is where, like, Nightwing is.
Yeah, it's Oasisburg.
Okay.
And so she goes there. Here's Daniel Waters' quote. He says, after the traumas of Batman Returns, she has amnesia, and she doesn't really remember why she has all these bullet holes in her body, so she goes to relax in Oasisburg. What Gotham City is to New York, Oasisburg is to Las Vegas, or Palm Springs. It's a resort area in the middle of the desert. It's run by superheroes, and the movie has great fun at making fun of the whole male superhero mythos. Then they end up being not very good at all deep down, and she's got to go back to being the whole Catwoman thing. So that was Daniel Waters' kind of pitch for that movie. It was in development hell forever. Michelle Pfeiffer was attached for a long time. Burton was producing. Burton wasn't sure if he wanted to direct it. It just goes on and on through all of this stuff. Pfeiffer was still interested as late as like 95. Eventually she was replaced in casting by Ashley Judd, and then finally it became the movie Catwoman with Halle Berry. And poor Halle Berry, she's not her fault. But yeah, that was a priority for Warner's. This is something that Warner's has always done with heroes. They get a weird idea in their head, like, we have to make this movie, even if it takes like 20 fucking years.
And like everybody involved with the reason we wanted to make it in the first place aren't even involved anymore.
That's like this wasn't Warner's, but that's like Venom itself.
Yeah.
And Venom made $1 billion, so joke's on us, I guess.
Well, Halle Berry's Catwoman did not.
Yeah, no, it did not. No, it fucking killed Halle Berry's career for a while, after she had become the first black woman to win an Oscar.
Yeah.
So, Hollywood.
Yep.
Yay. Anyway, Michelle Pfeiffer's great. The one big actor here we have not talked about is Christopher Walken, and good God, I love him in this movie. I love his weird wig. I love his weird eyebrows. I love his weird makeup. I love the way he talks, because I always love how Christopher Walken talks. I love that he is named Max Shrek, which is a reference to the actor in Nosferatu who plays Nosferatu, whose name we've never actually learned. We don't know who that man was, but he was credited as Max Shrek.
I love the sentence in the Wikipedia which says the character Max Shrek, who is named as an homage to Max Shrek. I'm like, really? Wow, I never would have guessed that Max Shrek was named after Max Shrek. Was named after Max Shrek. Only the Max Shrek from Nosferatu is a C in it.
Yes.
Not just Shrek like the ogre.
Yes.
Which is what Max Shrek is in this movie.
I want the Shrek crossover where Christopher Walken's Max Shrek meets Mike Myers' Shrek.
And then Nosferatu shows up and kills them both?
Kills them both, yep. The rare thing, a comic book movie villain who is not based on a character from the books.
He's an original creation for this movie. It's just he's just like the business tycoon. They could have grabbed any one of a million comic book villains, but they thought
he could have been like Maxwell Lord or something.
Yes.
But I do think that gives him a bit of a free rein to
just do whatever you want with him.
Because he is the source from which most of the villainy in the movie spreads, either literally or figuratively. Because he literally kills Catwoman and brings her back. He literally brings the Penguin up from the sewers, but he also stands in for all the forces of Gotham that made the Penguin. And he's the guy who gives him the idea to run for mayor and everything. He's really good in this.
Yes, it is a very Christopher Walken performance, but it is like the fucking wig. I love it so much. They went... Because, I mean, God, how old was Christopher Walken when they made this fucking movie? Because it feels like...
Probably 50 or so.
Yeah, because it feels like they wanted to make him look a lot older than he is, but it just looks
or
like...
Or a lot younger? I'm not sure. I'm not sure which one it was.
Because when you were reading off,
he would have been around the same age as Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
He was born in 43, so about 50.
Yeah, so I think they were trying to age him up a little bit by giving him this wig. And it's just it looks so... it just looks so much like a movie wig. They're not trying to hide it or disguise it in any way.
That's something I like about Tim Burton. Tim Burton is not afraid to have, artificiality at all levels, including... you have Chris Walken. If anyone can pull off a fake wig, it's Chris Walken.
Yeah.
Do it.
Absolutely. And it just works. He fucking pulls it off.
The only moment that doesn't ring true for me with this character is when Penguin comes up at the Christmas ball and demands to take Max's kid. I do not believe Max would sacrifice himself for his kid.
That's one of those things where I feel like is one of the clumsy areas of the script where they do very specifically set that up earlier. If he keeps on talking about my legacy, I want to leave for my kiddo, whatever. He says it multiple times, and they have his big dumb meathead kid son in a lot of the scenes.
I said this to my brother last night. I said it would have been so much better if they'd had Chris Walken also play the son.
Yes.
Put him in a different wig and use the tech to have them both be but Dad, I don't want you to go.
But you've got to go, son. Yeah, no, it's oh my God, that would have been perfect. But yeah, it's one of that where I think the whole firstborn son thing in the script just feels very slapped together. It doesn't follow the logic of the rest of the movie, and so it feels like they put some setup for that. But you're right, that's even though they've put very clear specific lines of dialogue to set up this idea, it feels like bullshit when it happens. It's
because I don't buy anything Max Shrek says. If he says he's trying to leave a legacy, it's like when Donald Trump says that about leaving the Trump. He doesn't give a fuck. He wants the building to be buried with him. He doesn't think he's going to die. So there's that.
Yeah.
But and I honestly think there is some interesting stuff with the firstborn son stuff, because it is seeded through more of the movie than I think we're giving it credit for. Penguin has that plan from the beginning. That is his main idea. He goes to the Hall of Records. He's playing a whole trick on the city just so he can do this. And I think there is something you could have done where it is Penguin taking that kid and killing it. There's something you could do to make it more explicit and bring that, because it's a biblical reference, obviously. And you could do something. And I mean, this movie operates at an Old Testament biblical register in some ways, and you could do that. But yeah. But anyway, we are pro Christopher Walken. I am also pro hundreds of penguins with headpieces and rockets on their backs. So there was a lot of consternation apparently when this was being made over whether they were treating the penguins right. From what I've heard, I'm reading this, let me find if I can, the paragraph, because they actually went to pretty great lengths to make sure the penguins were okay, and it's pretty funny, yeah. So animal rights groups started protesting the film after finding out the penguins would have rockets on their backs.
Which is a great sentence, and it's very understandable why you would be concerned if someone told you, hey, they're making this Batman movie, and there's 1,000 penguins with rockets strapped to their back with little. But it's like, don't worry, they did give them little helmets.
Yes. Richard Hill, the curator of the Penguins, explained that Warner Bros. Was very helpful in making sure the Penguins were comfortable. On the flight over, the plane was refrigerated down to 45 degrees, recalls Hill. In Hollywood, they were given a refrigerated trailer, their own swimming pool, half a ton of ice every day, and they had fresh fish delivered daily straight from the docks. Even though it was 100 degrees outside, the entire set was refrigerated down to 35 degrees. This made it very cold for Michelle Pfeiffer, who was most of the time clad in only a thin latex cat suit.
And a healthy layer of talcum powder.
Yes. Also, the 6 emperor penguins who are the... who act as pallbearers for the penguin's body at the end of the film. I love that I had to read that sentence. Those were not penguins; those were little people dressed as penguins.
Okay.
So they didn't use it. So actually, it sounds like they were fairly responsible. I do love reading all that though, and thinking like that was someone's job. To get a half a ton of ice every day, to get fresh fish, to keep the set refrigerated to 35 degrees. And I love that if anything tells you how much creative power Tim Burton had, he was able to look Warner Brothers straight in the eye and say, I want 1,000 penguins. I want them to have their own trailer. I want them to have rockets and helmets on them. And I want the set 35 degrees. We are putting the penguins above Michelle Pfeiffer's safety.
It's like, I just need a lot of penguins with rockets on them, okay? I can't tell you why. I just need it.
It is one of the most memorable images in the film, though. It's amazing to look at. Like, obviously today that would be CGI, and we would all feel a little better. But at the same time, it being real penguins kind of adds something to the movie for me. Obviously those are not real rockets on their back. They're little things of plastic. They did not actually put rockets on the penguins. But I do love the idea the penguin has a fucking army of penguins. And when he's all frustrated, he gives a big fucking speech to the penguins.
Yep.
And then when he dies, they are pallbearers and take his body into the water. I fucking adore that scene.
Yeah.
There's we can talk intellectually about the Freudian blah, blah, blah. I just love the weirdness of the penguin shit in this movie. Is there any other piece of penguin media where the penguin actually hangs out with penguins?
I mean, he usually has, a penguin or two with him.
Okay.
Well, depending on... Because sometimes, he doesn't like being called the penguin because it's
Yeah.
because it is a nice thing to say about a person. But, when they have the penguin lean into the penguin shtick, usually he's got, a penguin or two hanging around. Yeah. He doesn't usually have an army of rocket-equipped penguins that he is commanding like an army.
I want that level in the next Batman game where you have to fight the army of penguins. No, I want a Musso game where Batman is fighting just hordes of penguins.
You just murder 1,000 penguins a level.
And then another one, you're a penguin murdering Batman. Just thousands of Batman. Yeah, it's great. It's so memorable. There are various production elements we should talk about with this movie. I think this movie is an incredible production. Yeah. As much as, and we sung the praises of the first movie, because that first movie is also an incredible production. But this movie, I think, is exponentially more interesting. And keep in mind, I thought the first one is still one of the most visually interesting superhero movies ever made. Mm-hmm. This is the most visually interesting live-action superhero movie ever made. I don't think anything else touches it, and the only other superhero movie, period, that touches it is Spider-Verse, but that's because it's animated and wacky. This movie, to the degree that it almost feels animated. You could do this movie in stop motion, I feel like. I said that earlier. So you had the cinematography was by Steven Kozapsky. He's got Czapsky. I think that's Zapsky or something. But he's worked with Tim Burton on... He also did Edward Scissorhands and Ed Wood's. So he's Ed Wood. He's just a very good cinematographer. And you had the production design in this one was done by a guy named Bo Welch, which has always been weird to me because I went to elementary school with a guy named Bo Welch. But anyway,
same guy. He was very young.
Yes,
a genius ahead of his time.
But he's a great Hollywood production designer. He did a lot of Burton and other stuff. He's also a director who's done some pretty good stuff. Although, very unfortunately for him, Bo Welch, when he made the jump from production designer to director, the movie he was handed was the Mike Myers Cat in the Hat.
Ooh,
not his fault.
No, nobody could have done anything with that movie. But
no, I feel bad because
bad rap. Yeah,
he's done other stuff. I think he was the production designer on the movie version of A Series of Unfortunate Events, the Lemony Snicket movie, which has great production design, and then on the series, the Netflix one, which actually was a lot of the same people, he directed on it. So he's got a great eye for this kind of stuff. And I think there's a general just unified quality to the production design of this movie that's even more all-consuming than the first film. I love the way it uses snow and blue hues. And, like, there's just so much, like, expressionist shit in the architecture. Like, the Hall of Records is this big Gothic building that says in giant, like, life-size letters, Hall of Records. That nowhere in the world has that, but it's great. It looks like something from, like, the Greeks would have that or something. There's just so much in this movie that looks so cool. The whole penguin set we've talked about, which doesn't really look like anything else in either of these movies, but fits the aesthetic so well. It's just such a talented group of people who put this together, and the animated series was already in swing at this point. But I do think this continued to have an influence and everything.
It is, like, once again, as we talked about last time, I have the 4K Blu-ray versions, and it looks fucking phenomenal. It's just like every shot of the movie looks gorgeous. One of the things that looks best, and we talked about this last time as well, is like the use of shadows, that very German expressionistic way. Like, one of the best shots, particularly early on in the movie, is where the first time you see Batman or Bruce Wayne. It's like this ridiculous wide shot where he's like this little tiny man on a chair, and you just see like the light, like soft moonlight coming through the window. Then you get that close up on him, and the fucking bat signal comes through this like weird array of mirrors he has to shine it directly. So I guess he just chills out in this one room all the time waiting for the bat signal to shine through.
It feels very honest that what Bruce Wayne does is he hangs out, broods, and waits for a chance to go beat up poor people. And then the bat signal lights up the whole room, and you get that like very iconic shot. I feel like this is like if TV studio does a like retrospective on Batman. They have like 5 minutes. You have some narrator talking over about the Tim Burton movies, and you will always have the shot of Michael Keaton standing up and the bat signal behind him on the wall. And then you get back to the same wide shot, but now the whole room is flooded with light from the bat signal. Fucking gorgeous. It looks so good. It's one of the best shots in any Hollywood movie. I mean, just it's phenomenal. It's one of like the best compositions of the last 30 years of mainstream movie making. I love all of that. I honestly, in general, I think this movie shoots Batman better than any other Batman movie. You can quibble about the suit. I do think the suit is improved in this movie a little bit. It's still not my favorite bat suit.
And but the one thing they do is I feel like they learned what they could and could not do with that Batman suit. So they avoid, outside of like, you get a little bit of the Catwoman stuff, but like Catwoman fights are very brief. And you have like the one scene in the middle of the movie where he blows that dude up and lights a guy on fire, which is a little weird. And so, but those are like the only times that Batman really like fights people. It's not like the 89 movie where you have a bunch of like scenes where he's just fighting random gangsters like Joker's dudes on the street and stuff like that.
And it doesn't work because he can't move.
So they just avoid that and just focus on like the iconography and the visual element of Batman.
They mostly focus on big still shots where Batman, as you say, iconography in the sense of he is an icon sculpted on screen in light and shadow. And it's so striking. It's something the animated series does well all the time. And I think this is the only live action movie that approaches that for me. And they do it all over this movie. And it's so good. And also diminishing Batman when they need to. I think there's shots that do that as well. So it's an incredibly well done version of Batman in that way. I have always remembered and been freaked out and intrigued by the scene where he straps a bomb to a guy's chest and then throws him down the sewer. And while he does it, he has this little smile. And I don't know. I said this about the Michael Keaton performance in the first movie. There is this, under the cowl, he lets his freak flag fly. And I think this movie goes further with it because it's not just like an accident that he's killing people in this movie. It is a consistent thing. In the first big battle with Penguin's men, he lights one of them on fire with the exhaust from the Batmobile. In that scene, he kills multiple people and blows one of them to Kingdom Come. Like, he is like this kind of brutal, violent killer out in the cowl. And I think this movie actually like contextualizes it in a way where, like, in Batman v Superman, in the Zack Snyder vision, it's just he's jacking off to a Hot Topic shirt because Batman killing people is really sexy.
And then he's gonna say fuck. Oh my god.
Oh my god. Zack Snyder thinks Batman being adult is saying fuck. He should watch Batman Returns.
Exactly. But I think like there's a couple of ththings there with Batman blowing that dude up. Like one, like the violence is so ridiculous and cartoonish because he blows him up by sticking because it's one of their bombs, but it's like this giant, ridiculous cartoon like bundle of dynamite.
It could have been a prop on the 66 show.
Exactly, yeah. It looks like it should have a fucking Acme Corp logo on it, you know? It's Looney Tunes as fuck. And he throws the dude down a hole and the dude explodes. The lighting the dude on fire is the one that I did not remember that at all. That's the one I'm like, man, this is a little weird because it's just like there's nothing like the thing that's cartoonish about it, and this is very funny, is the Batmobile like has this like fucking thing that like this pole that sticks out the back, and it lifts the Batmobile up, and then it turns it around in place, lowers back down, and then fires the exhaust at him. It's like this whole weird machination just to turn the Batmobile around and light a fucking dude on fire.
The Batmobile in this movie has a bunch of things that are there for like a specific scene, but you cannot imagine their function anywhere else. That's one of them. There's this thing where he's driving through the goons and he has these two poles that come out the side of the Batmobile, which would only be useful for that situation where it's two guys on stilts, because otherwise he would cut their legs off. And there's the one where like he's able to shred the parts of the Batmobile and get rid of them so he can go through a little alley.
Yeah, I did not remember that at all. I'm like, oh wow, the Dark Knight just totally ripped this whole thing off with its like
for half a second, I was like, does he get on a motorcycle in this version? Because that's almost exactly what the Dark Knight does.
Yeah. Instead, it's like a little like weird like F1 like drag car looking thing.
It is cool. I do also like his little submarine, whatever the fuck it is, skipper he's got at the end of the movie for the Penguin.
Yes. Thinking of the Batmobile, one of my favorite moments of this whole movie, just because I find this conceptually hilarious, is when Batman in the Batmobile just like slowly drives by and like stops and looks through the window of the Batmobile into Penguin as Penguin's in the Hall of Records looking up all this shit. And I just love the thought of Batman casually driving the Batmobile around. It's just like there's no crime happening. He's not like racing down the streets with like a turbojet engine at 1,000 miles an hour. It's just him like 20 miles. He's driving. He sort of stops a little bit, looks at the window, and then continues to drive on. It's so like you just have to imagine there's like a reverse shot of like a family walking home on like the street corner and be like, what is that, the fucking Batmobile? What the fuck?
They should have followed that up with a scene where he drives slowly by a pizzeria and leans out to see their hours, see if they're still open.
It's so funny to me.
That Batmobile, though, God, it's such a good Batmobile.
It's very good.
I do also like the scene where the goons take it apart and put all this shit in it, and then, of course, there's the whole Penguin remote controlling it with his like little buggy he's got in his trailer.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's a fun scene. And I love Batman having to like reach out under the Batmobile.
Somehow he just with his fist punches the bottom of the Batmobile out. Or I'm like, I'm pretty sure like any car that would be impossible. I'm pretty sure the Batmobile it would be extra fucking hard to just punch the bottom paneling out in your like armored supercar.
Michael Keaton, man. He's a real superhero.
Yep, he's a tough motherfucker.
That wasn't a stunt. They really did it. But I do love he's just got to... And then he almost hits an old woman. Batman's reputation is also just completely shredded by the end of this movie. It is impossible to imagine how he goes back to being a hero.
I mean, he's been murdering people through the whole... He set a motherfucker on fire. Like, yeah, it was a guy committing some crimes. But it's like not that... I can understand why Gotham would be very ready to believe that he killed that like one lady. He's just like, he's just been killing people all the time.
I imagine that, the end of the movie is the bat signal lighting up. That is Gordon setting a trap. So Batman comes and they just arrest him.
That's a good point. They never do resolve that, do they? They never, like, address the fact that, that Batman is... The trust in Batman has been eroded.
It's like the end of The Dark Knight, but unacknowledged. He is a criminal now. Yeah. Anyway, I also really love Alfred in this one. I always love Michael Gough's Alfred. He's phenomenal always. He is very funny in this one. He's just got a lot of nice little scenes. There's also a lot of scenes where I just feel bad for him, like when he's out shopping and has to go. I'm like, why don't they have another butler for that?
Yeah.
Like, Alfred is too busy and old to be going out in the ice and doing the just basic shopping. How is Bruce Wayne this fucking cheap?
Yeah.
I feel like Alfred could hire an intern and Bruce would never learn it. He has plenty of money.
I do feel like with this Alfred in this movie, they get a little bit more of like the sarcastic Alfred that is like, to me, that's like what Alfred is. Alfred is always supposed to be kind of like taking the shit out of Bruce.
Yes.
And
the animated series does it really well.
Yes, does it phenomenally. And here it has that great scene where Bruce is investigating into the history of the Penguin, and Alfred just says, "It's like what you can't stand to have one other person be as lonely as you are."
Yes. Oh, it's great. Yeah. And finally, maybe the MVP of this movie, Danny motherfucking Elfman.
Uh-huh.
This is one of my favorite movie scores.
It is phenomenal because it's a movie. I mean, it's already, it's taking all the great stuff that Danny Elfman did in the '89 movie. But I feel like this movie's construction relies on music more because it's so complex and it's very like emotional and the like hyper real or like psychological real.
Yes.
And so it sort of needs the music to drive a lot of that. And so it feels like they kind of upped the like task of what Danny Elfman had to do for the film, and he like answered like above and beyond the Call of Duty for it.
It's in that first movie, I think the main theme is amazing, and there's moments of like high tension that are also really well scored, but there's a lot of in between stuff where, and I don't think it's Elfman, it's just the movie like doesn't call for anything that interesting.
Yeah.
And this movie, when there is music, you are noticing it, and it is so good, and it has more in common to me almost with like silent film scoring than modern Hollywood scoring, where it almost feels like this should be a live orchestra in the pit over the movie. You could strip out an awful lot of the dialogue in this movie. And I know this because there's actually a really good, I've been unable to find it again, but there was a fan cut of this movie called The Batman Returns, done with 2 words. And it was done in the style of a German expressionist film. So what they did is they took the movie, ripped out all the sound, tinted it like Caligari or something, made it black and white and tinted, and then replaced all the dialogue when it was there with intertitles. And it's amazing how little work had to be done to make it just feel like it's a fucking German expressionist film, because its architecture and its look, and I think its editorial style and everything just works so well for that. And I forget if they used like an old organ score or something, but you could also just layer the Elfman score on top of that.
Yeah.
And it would still work. It's in that register. Everything he does at the end of this movie, just, my God, the last like 20 minutes of scoring are insane.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like it does, like it just feels like the music pulls everything in the movie together to me.
Yeah. I mean, the best superhero movie score ever is John Williams for Superman. I think this is probably number 2. And I don't know what number 3 is. I really like Danny Elfman's music for Spider-Man.
Yeah.
None of the MCU movies really. Ludwig Göransson for Black Panther is really good, but it's not on that level.
I agree.
Mark Mothersbaugh for Thor Ragnarok, but like these are really good, not all-time great.
Yeah.
I think Danny Elfman's Batman Returns score and John Williams' Superman are like 2 of the all-time great movie scores that have come from the superhero genre.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of what Hans Zimmer does on the Dark Knight trilogy is also extraordinary and had a huge impact on filmmaking. But I wouldn't put it on this plane.
Yeah, I think part of that is like a taste thing also.
Yeah.
That is like, I mean, it's the movie, as I said, it calls for like exceptional music to drive a lot of what the movie wants to do.
Yeah.
So like the score just feels like such a fundamental part of what the movie is doing.
I also just think like it had only been one other movie, Edward Scissorhands, but I think Tim Burton and Elfman's relationship had solidified in a way where like I think Edward Scissorhands kind of unlocks a lot of how they work together. And so you just get this sense of like they are in such sync. It's like Spielberg and Williams. It's just Burton is making these images knowing what he's getting on the other end.
Right.
In a way a lot of directors don't have that benefit. And again, watch this and then go watch Nightmare on Elm Street. Do that if you want. It's a good movie too.
It's
I was going to say Nightmare Before Christmas, because I think Nightmare Before Christmas and this are Elfman's 2 best scores. And he was basically doing them concurrently. And there's a lot of similar feelings, because that's also a Christmas movie and a Halloween movie. And like, there's just a lot of like shared instrumentation and whatnot. Both great movies.
Yeah.
Maybe my 2 favorite movies that have Tim Burton's name on them, even though he did not direct Nightmare Before Christmas. But yes, good God, Danny Elfman, so great.
Yeah, no, it is one of those like all-time great scores.
Yep. All right. What else to say about Batman Returns before we maybe call it a Christmas Eve?
It's just a good fucking movie, man.
Just
like,
good fucking movie.
it's
we haven't talked about the Christmas aspect. I love the snow.
Yeah.
I love the Christmas tree lighting is like a central thing here. That first big action sequence is all around people buying presents, and the fucking penguin comes out with his giant present he's gotten. We didn't talk about the penguin's big rubber ducky mobile he goes around in, which is incredible. All of that is stuff that feels like so much like what the animated series would do a lot with Penguin and other characters, and I love that you get that here. Even though Penguin in the animated series is much more in the Burgess Meredith vein.
Oh yes, they very much based him off of the Burgess Meredith character. Yeah.
He is not eating fish and biting people's noses off. This is such a cool movie.
Yeah, it is definitely like, because it's that thing where, I think the Christmassiness of it comes through so much in like the visual aesthetic. Like it's part of what makes the visual texture of the movie so rich is the contrast of the snow and the blue light, like that's very like moonlight kind of aesthetic, and then like the very rich shadows.
And it's an implicit part of the cultural and social critique going on here,
Yeah.
and psychological element of it is supposed to be this time for like cheer and love. It is portrayed as extremely consumerist and empty because who's the guy doing the tree lighting? It's Max Shrek. It is incredibly dark underneath all of this. The ending is Batman getting back in the car and Alfred wishing him a Merry Christmas and Batman saying goodwill towards men. And he looks at the cat.
And women too.
And women too. And it's just, there's something really biting about it that in part because it never really rises to the level of text until that final moment, I think allows it to, you can kind of read it however you want, but it reads very powerfully because it is, as you say, suffused through the aesthetic.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else to say about Batman Returns?
It has its stumbles in the third act, but it is, of the 3 Batman movies we've watched so far, it is the best one.
I think I'd agree with that. I think it's the best. There's a part of me that's still like my quote-unquote favorite is the 66 movie. But the 66 movie, part of that is tied up with the show and everything. As a movie, this is the best one so far.
Yeah, I would say like it would feel very bizarre if I said this was the best Batman movie we see so far and you didn't agree with me. Like, this is your one.
I love it. It's
this
great.
is the Jonathan one, though.
No, it's great.
You have to say, you should have been the one that said it before I did.
Two of the 3 movies we've watched so far are 2 of my favorites, so they're great. And next time, Sean, we are actually not doing Batman Forever.
What?
Because there was one other movie that came out in between.
Already this time has come.
So 1992 was Batman Returns. 1995 was Batman Forever. In 1993, Batman the Animated Series got called up to the big leagues with Batman Mask of the Phantasm, released theatrically on Christmas Day, 1993.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
You should just watch and record that podcast, put it out
on Christmas Day. So yes, not a Christmas movie.
No, it has nothing to do with Christmas. It's funny to me that it came out.
And this
on
movie
Christmas.
was released in June, Batman Returns, which is a dumb time to release this movie.
That's weird.
Yeah.
I would. I assumed that this movie came out around Christmas. I would have assumed that Mask of the Phantasm probably would have come out around a June-ish.
Yeah, I mean, Die Hard also came out in the summer. I don't get
bullshit.
to make your Christmas movies and put them out in June. But yes, we will be doing the animated Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which is one of the best Batman things.
Yeah, like it had not occurred to me that we would have already hit it, but of course it's right here, and it seems weird, but we're already going to hit the best Batman movie. Like, I just don't even know why we need to keep on doing the series after we watch Mask of the Phantasm.
Because there's a lot of weird ones we do not have settled feelings on that we want to talk about. But next time when we do Batman on film, probably sometime in January, it will be Mask of the motherfucking Phantasm, and it is good, and we will get to talk about the best Joker.
And the best Batman.
Hey everyone, Jonathan here. I was putting the finishing touches on today's show when I realized we forgot to say that this is our last episode of 2020. We'll be taking next week off for the holidays because Christmas is on a Friday, and then a couple days after that, so when we would normally be recording would be the 27th, and it's just kind of close to the holidays. We also want to have a little bit of extra time to play and finish and look back on some games so we can finalize our top 10 lists for the year, make that episode as great as it possibly can be. So we should be back for the new year, new season on Monday, January 4th. That should be starting off 2021 with our countdowns of the top 10 games of 2020. Always one of our favorite shows to record, so be looking forward to that. I also just wanted to take the time to thank our listeners for the past year. 2020 has, obviously, you don't need me to tell you this, sucked in 100 different ways. But it was one of my favorite years of podcasting we've ever done. And in part because of how bad 2020 was. This show became a way to, in some times, escape from the lows of 2020 and laugh and have fun and just talk about simple, nice things like games and movies. But it was also a place to confront a lot of the darkness we were seeing in the world and talk some of this shit through with Sean in what became our recurring Plague Cast segment. And I think I can speak for Sean in saying that was almost like therapy some weeks, just having this outlet to talk about what it was like teaching this year and working and living in this time. It was really helpful to have this outlet. And then, of course, having our side project, Weekly Suit Gundam, which was full steam ahead this year. We did another 13 episodes of that, and that's just one of the most exciting and enjoyable things we have ever gotten to do in podcasting. And those episodes are some of the episodes I'm proudest of in what is rapidly approaching 10 years of this show. So doing the Weekly Stuff podcast, doing Weekly Suit Gundam, that felt like a really essential lifeline for me this year. And I just feel so immensely grateful that we continue making the time to do this and that we have people listening and responding and enjoying the show. I feel like I heard from listeners and got to talk to you guys more than ever this year, and that means a lot, especially in 2020. And I just wanted to say that and let everyone who listens to this show know that, because it means a lot. And as a final way to just wrap up what is season 9 of the Weekly Stuff podcast. This was year 9, season 9 of the show, our 9th full year, calendar year of doing it. I believe there were 48 episodes this year. I'm going to check really quick. Yes, there were 48 episodes this year, so almost weekly. We only took a couple weeks off this year, which is insane considering everything that happened. I don't know how we did that. But I wanted to give you guys a little countdown of my favorite episodes of the year. I think in years past on Twitter, I've given sort of informal, here are a couple of my favorite episodes we did, but, you know, I know not everyone has time to listen to all of these, so I've made a little list. I'll probably put this on Twitter for people's benefit there as well, in case they don't listen to this one, although they should. This was a fun one, of all 10 of my favorite episodes from these 48. This is including all the Weekly Suit Gundam episodes, which this year got rolled into the main show, and appeared in both feeds. So I wanted to give you guys, these were my top 10. We do a lot of top 10 lists here, so these are my top 10 favorite episodes we got to do this year, ones that I'm just very proud we recorded and had a lot of fun with. And of course, my favorites might not be listeners' favorites. I have a feeling these are ones listeners liked from what I heard and saw and in traffic and everything. But obviously I have a different experience recording them and living it and knowing what it was like to have the conversation. But these are the 10 that I'm happiest, we got to do this year. And if you have not listened to all of these are, I think, my recommendations for ones you should go seek out. So from least most favorite to most favorite. My number 10 is one from just a couple weeks ago, episode 355, which was Batman on Film Part 2. This is where we talked about Batman 1989 with Michael Keaton. And this one is my favorite of the Batman discussions we've had so far for a couple of reasons. I really like the one we did today on Batman Returns. I really like the one we did on Batman 66, which is a movie I love. Batman 89 is not a movie I love, but it's a movie I found really fascinating to revisit. And I've always had complicated feelings on it, and I know Sean has always had complicated feelings on it, and I think talking through those feelings and really diving deep with this movie that is really important and deserves deep introspection and critical discussion, even if it's not a great movie, was really fascinating. And I think this episode came the closest to sort of my platonic ideal of what I want these Batman episodes to be like. So I'm really happy with that. And then this episode also we talked about Demon Souls, and we talked about Hyrule Warriors, and Sean introduced us to 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim, which I am still playing right now and is a great game. And we got to talk about episode 5 of The Mandalorian, which was the one with Ahsoka, directed by Dave Filoni. So just as a normal all-around episode, this one was about as good as it gets. My number 9 is by far the weirdest episode we did this year. We actually recorded this in 2019, but it came out in 2020 while I was in Japan, and that is Sean's anime episode, episode 312. Probably my favorite title I've ever given a podcast, Sean's anime episode, because this was... If I can pull back the curtain for a second, we were doing all these best of the decade episodes, and we were frantically recording them before I left for Japan, so we would have material while I was gone for essentially a month. And we did these 3 decade episodes where we did movies of the decade, we did games of the decade, and when we did the games of the decade one, when we sat down to record that, Sean said he wanted to do this anime thing, and he said he had a top 10 anime. And I thought that was going to be a pretty short list, because I had a pretty short list of my top 10 TV shows of the decade. And you'll hear in this episode, I do it in about 10 minutes. And I thought Sean's was going to be short, and then that would get rolled into the games one. And my plan was the games one was going to be a two-parter, and that's how it was going to come out. And then Sean basically monologued for like 2 or 3 hours straight about these 10 anime and then 40 other anime he had that he also talked about in pretty heavy detail. And so we got a primer of 50 separate anime from the 2010s. Just wow. And it was this massive download of information. And it is by far the least I've ever talked on an episode. And I was fascinated. I wish I had had more time this year to catch up on some of these anime he was recommending. But boy, it was fascinating to listen to. I hope people liked it. It's kind of a different episode than we've ever done, but the sheer novelty of Sean going like a goddamn freight train for 2 hours unceasing, talking about all the anime he watched the last decade. Not all the anime, some of the anime he watched the last decade. His favorite 50 was quite the thing, and I am very glad it exists as a record of the decade in anime from someone who watched a crap ton of it. So I'm glad we did that one. Number 8 is episode 315. This was my first episode back from Japan. It was Japan Quest, Jonathan's Great Adventure. And I would feel a little selfish putting this episode any higher because it's sort of... I didn't quite monologue in this one as much as Sean did in the anime episode because we did more back and forth. But it was one where it was mostly about me. It was about my adventure in Japan in December and January, where I went to Japan for about 3.5 weeks and got to hang out with my brother who was living there at the time. And I would, like I said, I would feel a little selfish putting this one any higher because it is a me-centric episode. But I think when I look back on all these podcasts one day, this is one of the episodes I'm going to be most happy I have for my kids or my friends or whoever, because it was about this Japan trip, which was this trip of a lifetime for me. It was somewhere I'd always wanted to be. I got to see so many things I'd always wanted to see. It was still fresh in my mind, so I was putting down all these memories on audio and talking with Sean about it, and then we did this video version, which was a real labor of love. It's by far the most time I've ever put into one episode of the podcast, that basically became a narrated photo journal of this entire trip. That's one of those moments I was so happy to have this podcast and this outlet, and I just have that as a record out there of everything I got to do. And I think it was fun for our listeners, hopefully, who I know are interested in a lot of the same things. This one also went out as an episode of Weekly Suit Gundam. So just so happy I have this one. So happy it's out there. Might go higher if I weren't sort of thinking that I like that this show is two people, not just one. But I'm very glad we have this one. Okay, so then we have number 7, which is a two-parter. This was our episode 350, 351, our top 10 favorite books of all time. One of our longest episodes this year because books take a long time to talk about. And one that, man, we have never done anything quite like this. We have certainly mentioned books on the podcast. We've heard some of Sean's literary adventures, reading different pieces of fiction over the years and high literature and whatnot. But doing an episode all about literature was a real high point of the year because I think Sean and I were both a little nervous about this one. And I don't think we're often nervous about podcasts, but just would people listen to it? Would people like it? Would we be comfortable talking in this format about books? And we were, and it was fun. And I think we had very different lists reflecting that Sean is an English, scholar, and I am not. I'm a film person. I obviously read, but I have a very different background in it than Sean does. And Sean has this pretty deep expertise, and I really loved hearing his list. And I've even picked up some of the books he talked about. Maybe talk about that in the new year. But it was also fun for me putting that list together because I love books, but I'd never really thought about it in that way. And the top 10 came together pretty easy for me, realizing what are the ones that mean something to me. And so getting to talk about that, it's just a very personal thing. It's another episode that I think helps the audience get to know us. I really like that. And it's the first episode of the podcast that I think was interesting enough for my stepdad to go listen to. He's someone, my mom's husband, who worked in bookshops for much of his life. And so he wound up listening to that one out of the blue. I didn't. He and my mom don't really even know what podcasts are, I don't think. So anyway, that was a fun one that I'm very fond of and glad glad exists. Number 6 was episode 318, which was our Sekiro Shadows Die Twice episode, where that was our Game of the Year for 2019. We didn't get to do our 2019 Game of the Year until February when I was back from Japan. And when we did it, we both knew, 2019 was a decent year for games. It had some real high points. It was mostly fairly fallow, as I think a lot of studios were keeping their powder dry for 2020 and the new consoles and everything, and kind of that final push of the old hardware and whatnot. Sony did not have a ton of exclusives that year, but we had the FromSoft game Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and we just knew that had to be... We did our top 10 countdown, and then we stopped at number 2, and we left number 1 for a separate episode just all about Sekiro, and I'm so glad we did. It's the only time we've done that for a number 1 game, but we got to talk really deep about this game that I had a really complicated journey with, that I tried it over the summer of the previous year, and I couldn't get into it, and it was too hard, even though I had fallen in love with Dark Souls, but it was maybe too close to Dark Souls for me to, really love. The game is different, I just meant I was too close to Dark Souls, and so... It was a really fun, crazy experience for me, finally besting that game. I have stronger memories with that game than just about any other game ever. And again, it's one I'm really glad I got to kind of put down my thoughts on with Sean right in the heat of the moment after finishing it, because God, that game is a high, and it's one of my favorite video game-centric episodes we've ever done. My number 5 was Weekly Suit Gundam episode 20. This also came out as the Weekly Stuff Podcast episode 335, and that was our Weekly Suit Gundam 1-year anniversary celebration, where on June 24th, which was the day we launched Weekly Suit Gundam in 2019, we came back for this 1-year anniversary. We ranked all 11 shows and movies we had done big episodes on so far, and we ranked our favorite mechs, and we ranked our favorite songs, and we ranked our favorite characters, and it was just a real fun way to kind of plant the flag on 1 year of Weekly Suit Gundam. It was a little bit of a victory lap episode because we are so happy with and proud of that show and what it has grown into, because it was never intended to be a standalone series. It was never intended to go beyond that first show. It just kind of bloomed out of the ether of me falling in love with it and wanting to have this experience of watching it all and talking about it. And I love Weekly Suit Gundam. This is not necessarily the deepest single episode we've done, because we're not talking about any one show in depth, but it's one of the most fun, and I think if you're a Gundam fan, this one is probably one of the most rewarding to listen to. So that's my number 5. My number 4 is a really interesting one to me, and that is episode 336, which was The Last of Us Part 2, our full review of that game. And this is an episode that I can say really challenged me, because I think this is a tough game to talk about, whether you like it or not, because it's tough material. And I think it was one where I just didn't have my feelings and reactions fully formed or digested going into it. So I can't speak for Sean, but for me, you really hear me working through my feelings on this game in real time in that episode. And I think it's just one of the most clarifying conversations we've ever gotten to have on the show, where through listening to Sean and hearing his really deeply thoughtful take on material I did not respond well to, it not only helped me see the value there, but also helped me understand and vocalize my feelings and come to term with those. And honestly, I think I probably came away from this discussion feeling more alienated from Last of Us 2 and pretty set in my feelings that this is not a game I particularly like. But I definitely understood the critically positive argument for the game so much better than I did before. And I think that's the value of having these real-time, in-depth conversations. Much more so than sitting in a room alone and writing a review, which I have spent a lot of my time doing in my life. There's something very valuable and wonderful about that, but I just find the process of thinking out loud with another person who I respect and jive with and get a lot out of talking to, every year that attracts me more and more to podcasting. And an episode like this, even if it's on material I can ultimately say I am not a fan of, that's the reason for the value of this. And so that is a real exemplary installment of the show for me. Number 3 is here because it was just so much goddamn fun to record. And that was Weekly Suit Gundam episode 24, released as the Weekly Stuff Podcast 348. And that was our episode on Mobile Suit Gundam, the 8th MS team, which is the OVA series from the late 90s. Gundam in the Jungle, Gundam in Vietnam, Gundam Romeo and Juliet, however you want to describe it. I don't think the 8th MS team is the best Gundam show. I certainly don't think it's the deepest Gundam show. It's not even the best of the OVAs we talked about. That would be War in the Pocket. But it is one of, if not the most purely entertaining Gundam shows, one of the most purely entertaining anythings you'll ever see. And it is a ridiculous amount of fun to talk about and gush over. And, you know, sometimes pure gushing episodes I can feel dragging, and I know, you know, and we have strategies for, I think, getting through that and trying to be critical. But this is one where it was just a pure love fest. And I think for something this good and this much of a chemical rush, that is well earned. And I am just so happy. This is one where because I had seen 8th MS Team before. I'd seen it a year earlier. And so this was one, along with our other OVAs, I really wanted to do justice to, and I think we did. I'm really happy with all those episodes, but I really think we did justice to the 8th MS Team. I'm really happy with this episode, and I think if you're a fan of that show, you're going to really love that one. Or if you're lukewarm on that show, maybe you'll come away wanting to give it a second chance. It is, I don't know how you could be lukewarm on 8th MS Team, but somehow you were. I am just so happy we did that one. Number 2 is episode 340, which was just titled The Final Fantasy VII Episode, because this is where we talked about the original Final Fantasy VII, which both Sean and I played for the first time in full this year, the original PlayStation 1 game. We talked about Crisis Core, the PSP game. I had not played it. Sean had played it. He talked about that in depth. We talked about Advent Children, the movie, and we went in detail on Final Fantasy VII Remake, which we had both played over the summer and wanted to talk about. So people had been asking us our thoughts on Final Fantasy VII Remake for months, and I hadn't gotten around to playing it because I did not have my PlayStation with me for several months because of COVID. I had come to Colorado. I hadn't brought everything with me. I didn't know I was going to be here for the full lockdown. I had to go back and get my PlayStation over the summer. So I couldn't play it. Finally played it over the summer. Sean played it when I played it, and then we did this big explosion of Final Fantasy VII all in one episode, and this is one I'm just so glad exists for posterity, for our archives. It's the kind of thing I'd really like to do more of, having an episode on a classic video game like this, plus all this other periphery around it, and getting to go in depth with it, with a game that I think really surprised us, because Final Fantasy VII's reputation is big, and it still is a game that I think took both of us by surprise when we finally sat down and interacted with it fully. Even as I think we also both realized how much we don't like the remake. Not much for me at all. And so it was fun to talk about all of that. But also Sean did a crazy skit in this one that was based on a Doctor Who monologue, and he made me read that with him. That's the kind of weird shit I normally do, and so he did it, and it was hilarious. So there's a lot of good one in this, and this is definitely one that just for the archives, for posterity, if I wanted to direct someone to what is a representative episode of our weird-ass show that kind of shows what we're about and can do, I hope this is one of those. And my number 1 was Weekly Suit. It had to be a Weekly Suit Gundam, because that just really defined a lot of what we accomplished this year. And my favorite Weekly Suit Gundam we've done is episode 19, which was Weekly Stuff Podcast, episode 332, and that was our episode on Turn A Gundam, the Gundam from 1999, that is the second best Gundam in the series, the first best being just the original Mobile Suit Gundam, but it is a close race, because Turn A is a masterpiece. If that word means anything, it applies to Turn A Gundam. This is probably the media experience, at least in terms of not a video game thing, but a TV or a movie or something like that just hit me hardest this year digesting. And then we really went deep with it. And I think this episode, there's nothing too special about it in terms of we didn't do anything gimmicky with it. It's just us talking about Turn A Gundam for an ungodly length of time. But it is the platonic ideal to me of the kinds of rich, in-depth discussions around media that we love and respond to we don't have to love it, but we've responded to, that I really always hope this show is about, and I think this show is at its best when we do. And I think it's the best and most thoughtful episode of Weekly Suit Gundam we've done, befitting one of the best and most thoughtful series we've ever gotten to talk about, and just one of our best long-form discussions, which, again, I think is the heart of this show. So I am really happy with that Turn A Gundam episode. A couple others, so that's my top 10. I would recommend any of those 10 if you want to hear things you missed this year, because I loved those. In general, I'm happy with most of our podcasts, but those are ones I love. Other ones I would say that were on my short list here. Episode 319 was our Neon Genesis Evangelion episode that was also on Weekly Suit Gundam. Finally got to talk about Eva. I get hate mail about that sometimes, but also I get people going, yeah, you know what, I don't like Eva either. So it was fun to finally watch and confront that show, because it's a hell of a thing. Episode 313 was our Games of the Decade episode. Not the most substantive list we've done, because a lot of that was frankly repeats of our favorite games of all time. And I think the best part of that episode is actually when we are debating together what are the most important games of the last 10 years. And so I really like that part of it. In terms of other Weekly Suit Gundam episodes, the episode on Mobile Fighter G Gundam, the Gundam Wing episode, After War Gundam X, the other OVA episodes, 0083 and War in the Pocket. I'm happy with all of those. Probably the other best Weekly Suit Gundam we did, I think, was Gundam Seed, because that is such a interesting show, and it's really popular, but it's also a pretty fraught show. And I think I was surprised because I didn't like it at first, and I think Sean was surprised by how much he wound up liking it on a second viewing after liking it the first time, but maybe not loving it. And I came out of that liking Gundam Seed even more than I did going in. So I'm really happy with that one. Just looking at my list here, I think our PS5 First Impressions episode, 353, really happy with that, how that turned out. I'm glad we both managed to get our hands on PS5s. We got to do coverage of it. I thought that one turned out really well. Episode 325 is a pretty normal episode, except at the end, I did a stupid game where I tried to quiz Sean on the streaming service Quibi, which both launched and died this year after spending $2 billion. And I was trying to quiz him on what is a real Quibi show and what is a fake Quibi show. That was a lot of fun to put together. Episode 329, my brother was on that after getting back from Japan. And we did our Knuckles Raps Jamboree, where we did dramatic readings of all the Knuckles the Echidna raps from Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. That is one of the silliest things we've ever done. Then, of course, the other Batman on Film episodes I'm happy with. So, I think this was a year I am really happy with for the podcast, not for the world, not necessarily for my. I'm pretty proud of myself this year. I got things done. I think I kept it together pretty well, but I'm proudest of everything we did on this podcast. So thank you for listening. Thank you for a great 2020. Thank you for a great season 9, and we will see you in the new year for what will be season 10 of the Weekly Stuff podcast. That is too many seasons. But we'll be back. We'll be talking about the best games of 2020 and so much more. It's going to be a big year. We've got Weekly Suit Gundam. We've got Batman on Film. We have so many things we are going to be doing that are going to be fun this year. 2021 could be our best year ever, I hope. And if it is, it's because you guys are still listening and encouraging us. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Have a great Christmas or any other holiday you celebrate now or in the future. Have a wonderful New Year's. Be safe out there, and we will see you in the new year.